The story began at night, when a knight in shining armor fiercely shouted at a man named Zeke and declared, "Of all the people in the world, it is Zeke alone whom he will never be able to forgive." However, that dramatic clash was not real. It took place inside the Odom game that the boy was playing on his phone. To Zeke's nighttime anger, he only snorted disdainfully and coldly asked why he should care about someone else's forgiveness at all. He declared that everyone present there would be cut down right now, and that he would personally kill each of them to the last. Watching the tense scene unfold on his screen, the boy let out a groan of irritation and muttered that Zeke was still just as unbearable. Renewing his determination, he decided to put an end to the final battle forever. He quickly started pressing buttons on the controller, sending attack after attack at the villain until Zeke was finally defeated. The boy immediately joyfully shouted victory and proudly declared that he had finally done everything. But before he could finish speaking, his body suddenly shook and he fainted and fell to the floor. At that very moment, a loading screen appeared on the game screen. When the boy opened his eyes again, he found himself in a completely unfamiliar place. Confused, he did not understand where he was or what was happening. Suddenly he realized his hands were moving on their own, cutting meat as if it were a habit. The man sitting opposite suddenly spoke and asked why he was lost in thought. The man reminded him, time is something that no gold can ever buy back. Nearby, a woman added that he was already 12 years old, so he could not behave like a child forever. As the boys looked into their faces, he felt that those two in front of him were strangely familiar. Then the woman called him by the name Z. Following that name, the boy froze in shock. Looking at his reflection in the wine glass, he slowly realized the terrible truth. The game he had played before had somehow been turned to evil by himself. He became Zeke Ledges. The game Wish Soul was an incredibly popular RPG, renowned for its deep story and highly enjoyable combat system. And not only the main hero, almost every character in the game became a favorite thanks to their unique personality and charm. And among them were those two, but the reputation of the one who fell to the absolute bottom belonged to the final boss, the very embodiment of evil Zeke Lagius. Zeke attacked the protagonist's family, kidnapped the heroine, turned the Night Order into his own army, and completely destroyed an entire city along with all its inhabitants, and all these atrocities were just the beginning, as his list of crimes seemed endless. Zeke Lagius was a monster, a cruel and hopeless villain, and that is exactly what the boy has become now. The boy trapped in Zeke's body supposedly wondered if this was like reincarnation. Everything seemed eerily real. The body obeyed him without any problems, moved naturally. But when he thought about it, he absent-mindedly touched the glass. It fell to the floor and shattered into pieces. The sound immediately grabbed attention. The maid nearby, noticing the broken glass, nervously hesitated. Instinctively, Zeke was about to apologize, but completely different words flew from his mouth. Strictly demanded to know how the maid was wasting time there, and ordered to clean up all the mess immediately. He warned her not to humiliate their master, and even went so far as to call the maidservants worthless servants. As soon as those words left his lips, Zeke froze in horror. Deep down, he really wanted to apologize, but only insults and cruelty came out. Then he realized something truly terrible. The beastly manner of holding himself and speaking sounded exactly like the original Zeke from the game. This discovery pushed him to a horrifying conclusion. In this world, words or actions that did not fit the original individuality of Zeke Lagius seemed forcibly adjusted to the correct order. Later, alone in his room, Zeke froze in front of the mirror and stared at his reflection, muttering that there was no way to be mistaken here. This body really belonged to Zeke Lagius. And meanwhile, this identity became his own. He had already tried to resist several times, but no matter what he did, he was always forced to behave like a villain against his will. It seemed as if the world itself was forcing him to follow exactly the same life path as Zeke Lagius. Whichever path the player chose in the game, Zeke always eventually encountered the protagonist, and every route ended with him dying at the hero's hands. If everything went the same way, he too would face death at the hands of the protagonist. Suddenly, he was struck by the thought, if Zeke ever becomes powerful enough to be the final boss of the game, and there was still a chance that he would become strong enough to defeat the protagonist instead of him. Having buried this thought in his head, he decided to train, muttering that this was probably a failure for the hero and that he just needed practice. Unfortunately, reality turned out to be much more complicated than a video game. After several unsuccessful attempts, Zeke sighed with relief. There was no one nearby, so no one saw how pitiful he looked. He quickly realized, plowing with a weapon with his own body is not at all the same as just pressing buttons on a controller. Nearby maids whispered among themselves, one wondering if Master Zeke had suddenly decided to master fencing, and another replied that no one could even remotely understand the whims of the nobility. Later, inside the library, Zeke carefully reviewed a pile of documents with a list of potential instructors who could teach him. As he flipped through the names, one suddenly caught his attention: Blink Hartman. He immediately recalled the name from the game. Blink Hartman was once a regiment commander in Night Order, while the other candidates on the list were almost worthless compared to him. Zeke silently reminded himself, if he couldn't stop acting like a villain before meeting the protagonist, then he had no other choice but to become stronger and survive. And to achieve this, he needed the guidance of the former Commander Knight, Blink Hartman. The next day, the butler informed Zeke that the man he summoned had already arrived. Without wasting time, Zeke allowed him to speak frankly and ordered him to raise his head. Following the order, the man introduced himself Blink Hartman and said he came in response to his lord's call. Blink explained that the offer to become Lord Zeke's personal instructor was truly a great honor, but due to certain circumstances, he could not accept the position. Hearing this, Zeke was noticeably surprised. He blinked and it immediately became clear. About a year ago, his son fell ill with a serious disease. Since then, he had devoted himself entirely to caring for the boy, but the recovery was painfully slow. He admitted all he wanted was more time with his son. That was why he left the royal capital and returned home. Hearing these words, Zeke finally understood the real reason why Blink left his position in the Night Order. Blink continued and said that the instructor position seemed like a blessing to him. Short working hours and close proximity to home would allow him to continue caring for his son. Unfortunately, his son's condition suddenly worsened. Zeke immediately caught him with a question whether money could not solve this problem. Blink nodded bitterly and said they had already consulted numerous doctors, but despite all efforts, his son grew weaker every day, and the pain became so unbearable that the boy could barely move. Zeke ordered him to tell every detail, emphasizing that it was a direct order. After a short pause, Blink bade. He said that for almost a year his son had been bedridden, although he could still speak and eat without difficulty. But only a few days ago his condition sharply worsened. Now he could no longer hold food inside him, and even breathing seemed to him unbearable torment. Hearing the symptoms, Zeke immediately concluded the treatment required the poisonous gland of Basilis. Blink froze in shock, stared at him, and asked the same aloud as if he did not believe what he heard. He clarified whether it was about the legendary poison dragon, but he quickly became embarrassed, explaining that hunting such a creature was too risky. Zeke sharply interrupted him and asked whether Blink really believed that he had any other way left. Zeke reminded, his son Bedreddin suffers incessantly, and even the slightest movement turns into unbearable pain. Zeke demanded an answer whether Blink realized how critical everything had become. These harsh words struck at the very heart. Blink could not utter a sound. Zeke coldly continued, if they fail, his son will die, and if Blink does nothing, the result will be exactly the same. After all, it was just a game of chance. Then he asked Blink whether he really wanted to change the cruel fate of his son. Blink looked at Zeke in shock, then slowly closed his eyes and gathered himself. In a moment he fell to his knees and begged Zeke to save his son. Seeing this, Zeke barely smiled and ordered Blink to meet him at a designated place in 3 days. Later, when he was traveling through the Torque Mountains, Zeke led ahead and Blink from behind called out to him and asked when the soldiers were supposed to arrive. Zeke immediately mocked, as if he was deaf or stupid, as if he would waste valuable soldiers for the sake of one baby who belongs to Blink. However, he did not say this aloud. Zeke admitted to himself secretly. The real reason was that his greedy parents would never have given him an army anyway. Blink suddenly flinched and pointed at Zeke, as if he had been gathering strength only a few days ago. Zeke calmly waved it off. He said that Blink had simply made his own overly optimistic assumptions. Blink paused for a moment before warning that going against the basilisk as a trio is pure madness. Zeke gave him a confident look and told him not to underestimate him. He doubted whether Blink really believed he would reach such a distance without having some trump card. Hearing this, Blink sharply exhaled in surprise, convinced that Zeke really had a prepared strategy. Inside, Zeke told himself he definitely had a plan. Most importantly, he has already decided how to survive in this cruel world. Thanks to the knowledge he had as a former player of the game, he was going to challenge the fate that awaited him. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains, numerous corpses were scattered on the ground. In a dark cave hidden deep inside lay a terrible basilisk. In the heart of the forest, a swarm of slimes. They gathered and launched an attack on Zeke, but before even one of them could touch him, they were instantly cut down and all fell. Watching the scene unfold, Blink encouraged him not to stop. While he fought, Zek quietly pondered how much a skilled teacher could change. Thanks to Blink's guidance, his sword fighting and stance had incredibly improved in such a short time. At such speed he felt, a little more and he would become even stronger further. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by the word Blink. He warned about the monster approaching from behind, and he immediately reacted. Zeke turned around and struck with his sword at the slugs flying towards him, quickly dispatching them without any effort. Blink froze in shock, unable to believe what he had just seen. Meanwhile, Zeke grimaced with satisfaction and proudly told himself that he had finally mastered the basic combination cross-slash. Blink, deeply impressed, said that Zeke had incredible talent. After a few training sessions, he had already reached such an impressive level. Yet Blink reminded himself, Zeke was still very far from being ready to face the basilisk. Late that night, Blink sat quietly alone, trapped in his own thoughts. He wondered if he could really rely on Lord Zeke. The young nobleman was clearly not an ordinary boy. Blink easily sensed his natural talent with the sword. Yet despite this, he still could not understand what Zeke was really thinking. Throughout the day, Zeke repeatedly slipped away secretly by himself, which made Blink suspiciously watch his actions. Moreover, Blink asked whether the story about the special antidote for magic sclerosis was even true. After all, Lord Zeke was known as the arrogant eldest son of the most controversial family, Lagius, a nobleman who oppressed commoners and despised everyone around him. At that moment, Zeke suddenly returned clicked, and his gaze sharply pulled Blink out of his own thoughts. Blink immediately demanded to know where he had disappeared to. Zeke casually replied that he was just taking care of business, then ordered Blink to prepare. Confused, Blink asked what exactly he was supposed to prepare for. Before Zeke could answer, the forest exploded with an unheard roar. Blink froze shock and icy stupor. This roar could only belong to a basilisk, but from what he knew, the creature's lair had to be much further ahead. Zeke unhurriedly, calmly admitted he had spread incense around the place that was specifically designed to lure the basilisk right to them. Hearing this, Blink froze and looked at him with disbelief. It had just dawned on him. The campfire had been incense from the very beginning. Blink couldn't understand why Zeke was acting so recklessly. Zeke immediately called him an idiot. And he noted that marching straight into the monster's lair would be much more dangerous, although Blink stubbornly agreed only because he admitted Zeke was right. Still, the plan did not give him peace of mind. At that very moment, heavy crushing steps thundered and rushed straight toward them. Within seconds, the ground burst with furious force, and a giant basilisk broke through from beneath the earth. Without hesitation, Blink stepped forward and declared that he would handle the basilisk alone, ordering Lord Zeke to stay behind. However, Zeke immediately rejected this idea and ordered Blink to stay in place and not move from his position against the wind. Blink froze there in complete disbelief. Despite his reaction, Zeke calmly began the countdown, 3, 2, 1. As soon as the countdown ended, a powerful explosion erupted right beneath the basilisk. Blink's jaw dropped sharply in shock as soon as he understood everything. Before he could finish speaking, Zeke calmly explained. It was a magic mine, a trap artifact with trap magic that automatically explodes as soon as sufficient pressure is applied to it. Although the devices were cheap, Zeke confidently stated that there were more than enough of them to deal with cannon fodder like basilisks. Blink could hardly believe it. It turned out Zeke had prepared everything in advance and no one had noticed. Unable to contain his curiosity, Blink asked how he could have predicted the exact route the monster would take. Zeke only smiled slightly to himself. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew the answer. He had cut down countless basilisks in the game, so he knew the terrain and all the predictable movements of the giant lizard as if on the palm of his hand. When a thick cloud of gunpowder slowly dispersed, the badly wounded basilisk forced itself to stand up. Blood poured incessantly from its wounds, yet the monster still remained alive. Then Zeke ordered Blink to stay out of the way and be useful, to guard the perimeter. Blink hesitated for a moment. In pure combat strength he understood, even stronger than Zeke. But when it came to knowledge about basilisk, Lord Zeke was unquestionably several steps ahead. But still Blink could not help but wonder, did the young lord really have another hidden plan in reserve? Eventually Blinker jumped into the jacket, but warned Zeke, if it becomes dangerous, he will intervene immediately. Moments later, Basilisk lunged toward Zeke and launched a fierce attack. Zeke slipped away effortlessly. Inside, he just snorted contemptuously. The attacks of this creature were once again as predictable as ever. His attacking patterns have not changed at all in his eyes. The fight became painfully boring. But suddenly excitement flashed on Zeke's face and quietly, almost in a whisper, he whispered that the real showtime was about to begin. He quickly ordered Blink to retreat. And not to be a fool who remains standing downwind. Confused, Blink blinked and asked what he meant. And just as the basilisk opened its jaws, understanding struck him instantly. The monster is about to release its poisonous breath. Blink instinctively called Zeke, but before anything could happen, a dense cloud of poison quickly spread and suddenly covered the entire area. Within seconds, Zeke completely disappeared from sight. Not seeing him anymore, Blink shouted his name in panic. Caught on the spot with horror, despair overwhelmed him as he muttered that this could not be. He blamed himself for everything, convinced that from the very beginning he should have fought the monster personally. In his grief, he quietly whispered the name of his son Luca, apologizing for once again failing in the role of a father. But even in despair, Blink suddenly noticed something strange under his feet. The floor under Blink was completely soaked with water. Sensing that something was wrong, he sharply turned to where he last saw Zeke disappear under the poisonous breath of the basilisks. To shock, Zeke stood there completely unharmed. A giant wall of ice rose before him. It shielded him from the poison. Blink froze in disbelief, unable to believe that it was truly magic. He could barely understand how Zeke managed to put up such an obstacle in an instant. Zeke just smirked boldly and casually said that he had never once said he couldn't use magic. There, deep in his memory, he recalled, the original Zeke was born a natural, talented magatheraphore. From the very beginning, he could control powerful ice magic. After that, Zeke sharply clicked in response to the blink, ordered to be silent and just watch. At that moment, Basilisk lunged at him again. The convict raised the sword end. The blade immediately flashed with a shimmer. In an instant, the icy magic swirling like a whirlwind wrapped around the weapon and froze it into a crystalline sword of frost. Blink could only freeze and remain in silent shock, unable to comprehend what he saw. With a calm expression on his face, Zeke quietly whispered to the monster to dive. The basilisk let out a deafening roar and unleashed another wave of poisonous breath. But Zeke remained completely unshaken. When he said this, he admitted that was exactly why he lured the creature to an area rich in water. In the blink of an eye, Zeke lunged forward and swung a blade forged from ice, cleanly slicing through the basilisk's flesh. At the very moment the strike landed, he activated his spell. Cyclo Cross, fierce icy spikes suddenly burst from the basilisk's wound, tearing outward like jagged spears. The monster convulsed in agony and let out death cries as the ice tore through its body. Blink froze in place, absolutely unable to believe what he had just seen. He immediately recognized the technique. It was a basic combo with a cross slash, but Zeke enhanced it with his signature ice magic and turned it into his ultimate finishing move. Moreover, Blink realized the surrounding area was saturated with water mana, so Zeke was receiving a colossal boost directly from the ground. Everything was calculated and set up perfectly. Zeke looked at Blink and coldly asked if he already understood. From this moment on, Blink would work for him. Finding no words, Blink immediately dropped to one knee and loudly declared his loyalty, assuring that he fully understood everything. Even as he swore obedience, one thought stubbornly lingered and pounded in his head: who is this guy? Meanwhile, deep in the mountains, chaos had already begun to spread. Frightened voices shouted warnings that monsters were attacking and ordered everyone to run. The entire area plunged into chaos and fear. Several men helplessly fell to the ground and could not move. One of them, barely conscious, weakly raised a trembling finger and pointed towards a little girl standing far away. She was having difficulty breathing. He muttered that everything happening was because of her. Tree cursed, ugly child. Again on the training grounds of the estate, Zeke drew his sword from its sheath and with one clean motion cut the block of ice in half. A few days ago, after the Basilis hunt, the group returned to the city dragging creatures with frozen bodies. The townspeople froze upon seeing the real Basilis. One man exhaled in disbelief that the beast was frozen to desolate even to the organs and had no idea what power could have done that. Someone else just stared. That something like this had never happened in the guild's history and doubted whether it was the work of that night watchman standing nearby. In response, Blink suddenly jumped to Zeke and introduced him. The man immediately recognized Zeke and Frozen Shaw. Nearby, another group whispered aloud in disbelief. They muttered that this was the demonic child of Lagia and doubted whether Lord Zeke himself could have done such a thing. In the distance, others looked at them with contempt, calling the hunt disgusting cruelty to animals and accusing them of poaching for profit. Hearing the insults and these accusations, Zeke showed no sign. Inside, however, he snorted disdainfully. How quickly people changed their mindset, how pathetic it was. Yet he still expected no less from himself given his terrible reputation. For him, explanations were useless. People would twist everything no matter what he said or did. Even so, the hunt at least obtained the ingredients needed for the medicine. Returning to the present, Blink called out to him. There was no trace of despair on his face anymore. He praised Zeke's achievements, calling them simply magnificent. Zeke, embarrassed by the compliment, offended him, and remarked, the faster he improves, the faster they will be carried into the past. Blink only flashed a smile and replied that there is something to look forward to. He added that thanks to Lord Zeke, his son Luke is steadily recovering. Zeke sharply replied that he did not ask for that, but in his soul, Zeke noticed, Blink's opinion of him is rapidly growing. But despite everything, so far everything was going according to plan. He just had to maintain this pace and not trigger the threatening death flag. Suddenly, loud noises rumbled nearby. She quickly glanced at the gates and wondered anxiously what fuss was going on there. A moment later, a man desperately begged Zeke for help. Zeke quietly sighed in his heart, another problem again. Not long after, two men were let into the house. Lord Lagia repeated his report in amazement, mentioning Alhai village on the northern plains, and the Martianists criticized this as utterly unacceptable since it involved bypassing official channels through direct appeal. The men immediately fell to their knees and began begging for forgiveness. They explained that their village was being attacked by magical beasts and asked for reinforcements. Hearing this, Zeke repeated what was said in amazement. Magical beasts. The man informed them that the threat came from a pack of breeze weasels. As soon as he heard this, Zeke immediately recalled everything he knew about these creatures. Individually, breeze weasels were small and weak, but they hunted in packs and possessed wind magic. Although each attack alone was not very destructive, coordinated strikes became dangerous, especially in the open terrain of the plains. Lord Lagia fiercely rejected the request, calling it ridiculous. He declared that he would not waste resources on a poor village like Alhai. In the end, he only emphasized that the village hardly paid any taxes anyway. For him, this issue was nothing but a waste of time, and he ordered the villagers to deal with the problem themselves. Smiling at his response, Zeke sarcastically swallowed. This classic scoundrel Lord Lagia is unfortunately his own relative. Then his thoughts turned to Northern Plains. As far as he remembered, this place didn't even appear in the game. Because of this, if you simply ignore what is happening, it is unlikely to cause major problems. Meanwhile, two men stood up, tears streaming down their faces. As they begged for help, silently no longer holding back despair, they begged, saying they couldn't return to the village like this, seeing their despair. Zeke froze for a moment, then sharply shouted for them to shut up. Both men seemed to be struck by electricity. After that, he turned to the parents and declared that he would go alone. Zeke explained that participating in taming monsters at his age would definitely boost his reputation. Laughing at the very thought that some ordinary greedy windmillerman creatures could pose a threat, he boasted he would turn their skins into matching scarves for two villagers. Hearing those words, the Martians proudly looked at her son, and Lord Lagia gladly noted that Zeke was finally showing some backbone, worthy of Lagia's heir. Eventually, the Lord agreed to the request and even promised to send a handful of soldiers along with his son. However, he strictly ordered Zeke to leave the village and return immediately as soon as the situation became dangerous. Zeke accepted the order without hesitation. Meanwhile, the villagers were clearly depressed after this conversation. Inside, Zeke noted with annoyance, no matter how hard he tried to do the right thing, his approval somehow continued to fall. Soon the group set off for Northern Plains. During the carriage ride, Zeke asked Blink why his son was following them. The boy immediately introduced himself Luke, and happily explained that it was all thanks to Lord Zeke. He was able to stand on his feet again, so he wanted a chance to prove what he was capable of. Zeke clenched his thoughts. The boy's restless enthusiasm radiated something suspiciously joyful. Luke nervously chuckled and insisted that Lord Zeke was probably joking. Still, Zeke relentlessly bullied him, straightforwardly asked what use that skinny rag like him could be. Luke apologized but still insisted that he was quite clever and claimed he would be useful. At that moment, Blink lowered his head and began begging Zeke to allow Luke to accompany him on the journey. Then Luke admitted that he once dreamed of becoming a knight and swore to repay the debt he owed to Lord Zeke. After that, Zeke fell silent. Inside, he noted, in the version of the story he remembered from the game, Luca Hartman never existed. It seemed as if reality itself was slowly drifting further and further away from the original plot. But eventually, Zeke concluded that none of it would matter if he became strong enough. Zeke exhaled with relief before finally allowing Lukaku to do as he wished. Hearing this, Luke beamed with joy and declared that he would not disappoint him. Nearby, Blink smiled warmly and thanked Zeke. Later, the carriage sank into a silence, calm and deaf, as the journey continued. Luke silently stared at Zeke. His father always called Lord Zeke an incredible man. Then Luke argued with this, insisting that soldiers and even ordinary people despised the young lord. But his father only smiled and told him, Watch and see for yourself." When Luke finally took a good look at this man, he would understand. Remembering these words, Luke pondered, who is this young lord really beneath all the rumors and mockery? He decided to uncover the truth with his own eyes. After several hours on the road, they finally reached the village of Alhai. Without wasting time, they immediately went to the village elder. Blink spoke first. He had heard that the village was attacked by breeze weasels. He noted that the beasts were usually gentle, so he wondered why they suddenly became aggressive. The chief explained that the beasts had become wildly furious without warning, and the villagers had no idea why. Suddenly, a fierce man interrupted him, claiming that the reason was the cursed child. He insisted that from the day she was born, the girl brought only misfortune. The village head quickly tried to silence him, warning, "Don't say such things in front of their guests." But the man did not stop. He accused the head of pretending not to know the truth and reminded everyone that it was because of this that they had isolated the girl from everyone. He noted that this was not the first time the beasts had gone mad and insisted, the cursed girl was always nearby when trouble happened. At that moment, Zeke calmly interrupted and asked who exactly this cursed boy was. Hearing the question, the chief reluctantly answered. Then 12 years ago, a girl with hair as white as snow was born in the village. At first, the villagers were just amazed, but when the girl turned 5, the rural store's storage mysteriously burst into flames. No one ever found out how the fire started, but from the burning ruins they found a girl calmly sleeping, with no burns on her body. When asked about it, she could only answer one thing: she remembered nothing. From that day on, misfortune repeatedly struck the village. All the crops withered without explanation, the wells dried up, the houses collapsed, the livestock suddenly died, the weather became unnatural, and the animals around grew angry and became rabid. Later, even the girl's own parents fell and died at the same moment. After he listened to the story, Zeke became interested in this case, the cursed child. Then he ordered them to bring the girl to him and explained that she would lead them to the scene. The peasants hesitated upon hearing his order. Noticing this, Zeke coldly questioned them about their reluctance. He reminded them that it was she who, many years ago, had remained standing during the fire. If so, then she was best suited to be their little guide. The man immediately led them to where the cursed boy was imprisoned. As soon as they arrived, Zeke ordered him to open the door. The door creaked and the man called the name of the young girl. Meanwhile, the tree, frightened by the sudden guests, the girl looked at them in confusion. As soon as Zeke noticed the heavy chain fastened around her leg to prevent her escape, his eyes widened. A wave of rage surged inside him, and he coldly ordered everyone to leave the room. The man hesitated for a moment, but suddenly Zeke's voice thundered across the hall. He demanded, was the fool deaf? Calling him a helpless idiot, Zeke ordered him to disappear immediately. The frightened man immediately ran away. Without saying another word, Zeke drew his sword and cleanly cut the chains that were tightening around the girl. The tree froze, stunned, staring blankly at him. She tried to speak, but didn't manage to say a word. Zix sharply said that she smelled terribly bad. The face of the tree instantly blushed with shame, and she hurriedly apologized. She explained that because she was a cursed child, the peasants refused to let her use the bats when others were around. Zeki frowned and asked why she was apologizing for the peasants' foolishness. Through trembling tears, the tree replied that everything happened because of her, because she was cursed. She believed that she was accepted. She was responsible for the monster becoming wild, and even blamed herself for the death of her mother and father. Tears ran down her cheeks as she begged Zeke to put an end to her life. She explained that the peasants were too afraid of her curse, so no one dared to do it themselves. Looking at the sword in his hand, she begged once more, kill her. Without warning, Zeke stepped forward and firmly took her cheeks in his palms. Turning sharply to her, he ordered her to listen carefully. He introduced himself as Zechleges, the undisputed heir of the Leges domain, and declared that he had come to kill beasts. He disdainfully snorted at the idea that some petty village curse could affect him. Such trifles meant nothing to him. With pride, he proclaimed himself the demonic child of Leges, and declared that he had no patience for her pitiful sobbing. Then Zeke ordered the tree to wipe away her tears, because she would become his guide on the attack side. According to him, that was her only value for now. The tree froze, looking at him in surprise as if repeating his words, not believing what she heard. She could hardly comprehend that she would have to be a guide. Before leaving the room, Zeke smiled mockingly and brazenly asked if she really thought that her pitiful curse could affect someone like him, a demonic child. He brushed off this idea before telling her to wash the dirt off her face and find clothes that didn't look like rags. And he added, her stench is unbearable. After he left, the tree quietly repeated the name, Demon Child, to itself, and her feelings tangled into a knot, confusion and uncertainty. Late that night, the northern plains filled with creatures known as Like the whisper of jumping martins, sneaking through the darkness, they suddenly caught a scent in the air, causing their hunger to intensify wildly and sharply. Outside the knights bustled, loading wagons. One of them shouted for everyone to prepare for an extermination mission. Another bitterly complained, not understanding why they were making such a fuss over a few worthless wind-blown pests. Mockingly, he scoffed at the whole story because of the demon child Latzia. They had blown a pathetic nonsense out of proportion. Hearing these remarks, Luke immediately noticed the low morale and complete lack of discipline among the Legis soldiers. He concluded that the cause of this most likely originated with the young lord. Both Luke and Blink decided to remain silent until someone suddenly announced that the cursed child was approaching. The man immediately warned everyone, "Do not look directly into the eyes of the taboo child." Luke repeated those words with disbelief, asking what they meant by taboo child. Blink calmly explained, it was nothing more than a backward village and superstitions. The villagers were convinced that the girl was to blame for every misfortune that had befallen them. A little later, Zeke stepped forward and asked if the entire company had gathered. Then he waved towards the tree and said to everyone, "The troublemaker will be their guide into the beast's territory." At these words, muffled whispers spread among the knights. They began to inquire whether the young lord really intended to use such a small child as bait. Wasting no more time, everyone took their places in the wagons and set off towards the beast's territory. While they were traveling, Zeke sank deeper into thoughts about the cursed girl, the very same one, about the tree. The villagers constantly called her a taboo child, but the explanations they gave were almost entirely based on unfounded accusations. The village well dried up, the underground waterway shifted. Crops perished due to constant problems with unchanging cultivation. Even the deaths of her parents became merely tragic accidents. None of those events had any connection to the tree, and yet, although he understood this, the whole situation still deeply troubled him. The tree pointed with its branch to the nearest plot and informed him that it was there, nearby, that the otter beasts had previously attacked in the wind. Zek looked at the area and thought it was just an ordinary plain, but suddenly a strong gust of wind swept over everything around, and at that very moment, Zek was struck like lightning by realization. He immediately shouted for everyone to drop to the ground. That mighty gust that had just risen was not an ordinary wind, it was wind magic. In the next moment, the cart was cut in half. The horse got scared and bolted uncontrollably, throwing the entire squad into chaos. While the confusion was spreading, Zik and Blink quickly jumped out of the wagon. Zeke growled angrily, calling the crusader his miserable vermin, and spitting out orders, demanded that everyone immediately form battle lines and protect the wounded along with these incapable ones. The soldiers surrendered immediately, but their shock quickly turned into horror when they realized they were already completely surrounded. One of the knights gasped from shock, staring at the endless horde before them. He screamed in panic, vainly trying to believe the unimaginable number of monsters surrounding them and wondering how they could possibly hold out in such a situation. Meanwhile, Zeke rushed forward without the slightest hesitation. With one blow, he knocked down 2 monsters at once in front of. He maliciously scolded the others for whining like idiots. He declared, even in large numbers, these creatures were still pathetic runtlings. Having said this, he quickly dealt with another monster. At the same time, Blink shouted to the troops not to lose their composure. He reminded them, although there were many monsters, the creatures themselves were weak. Following these words, the soldiers slowly regained confidence. Encouraged by Zeke and Blink, they charged into battle and quickly began cutting down the monsters that were rushing at them. Soon several knights sighed with relief as they finally understood the truth. The Demukai weasels really were not very strong, and defeating them did not require much effort. But Zeke did not let his guard down. The monsters were indeed weak, but something about this situation seemed too suspicious to him. Blink called out to Zeke and showed that he had noticed it too. Zeke replied with surprise, even someone as clueless as Blink saw it. Blink responded that the monsters' movements were strangely coordinated, unlike ordinary beasts. Zeke confirmed, Blink was absolutely right, and together with the multitude of monsters gathered here, he suggested that this area had become a breeding ground. Blink, shocked, repeated the words he had heard. If this place really was a colony, a nursery and unnatural territory where monsters gathered, lived, and reproduced in giant packs, then it was essentially an overworld dungeon. Cold sweat ran down Blink's face as he admitted, if this place really had turned into a monster colony, the situation had long since surpassed anything they could handle within realistic limits. At that moment, Zeke felt something strange. His eyes widened as soon as he realized that the mana flow around them had suddenly changed. Not believing his own eyes, he whispered to himself, hoping his suspicions were wrong. Meanwhile, Luke, hiding behind a damaged cart, tried to calm the tree. He told her that everything would be fine because his father and the soldiers were there to protect them. Nearby, knights continuously went into battle against the monsters, not retreating a single step. Suddenly, Zeke shouted a warning. Everyone must watch and beware of the monster's magic. In a moment, one of the horses was knocked down by a blow. Seeing the terrible scene, the tree screamed in fear as the horse died instantly. Tears streamed down her face like a river, and she began blaming herself for everything happening around. Inside, she was certain it was her fault because she was cursed, a forbidden child. She thought she should never have left the hut. She should never have broken the chain that held her. She cursed herself for believing Zeke's words and allowing herself to hope for something better. For her, hoping that all this was not in vain was foolishness. As the tragedy unfolded around them, the tree repeatedly apologized through tears, and she kept blaming herself. Meanwhile, Luke silently realized the situation before them was far from ordinary. Even the sheer number of monsters looked unnatural, and the existence of the cursed child only made the whole situation even more alarming. Suddenly, without any warning, the wind abruptly stopped attacking. The knights stood confused, not understanding whether the monsters were finally scared and lost their courage. Another soldier shouted that the creatures had completely stopped advancing. But the atmosphere quickly broke down. The monsters' auras began to shift eerily, and a chill ran across the entire battlefield. Luke froze in disbelief as he realized the monsters' mana was synchronizing and growing stronger together. The wind spread around them, and all the spaces simultaneously opened their mouths. Bright balls of lightning quickly appeared before them. Luke's eyes widened in horror as he recognized the spell. It was advanced magic air bullet. Every second passed, and the glowing spheres swelled, becoming bigger and bigger. Luke immediately pulled the tree after him, and forcing both of them into the ground with strength, made them fall. In the very next moment, countless air spheres burst out at all of them together. Everyone tensed in anticipation of a devastating blow, but strangely nothing happened. When the tree slowly opened her eyes, she froze and was stunned in shock. Towering icy spears suddenly grew around them, intercepting attacks and freezing nearby monsters solid. Zeke calmly noted that, undoubtedly, it was strange to see ordinary beasts capable of forming a unifying chain. However, he declared that now he would have to teach the monsters in advance exactly who the real prey in this hunt was. The soldiers froze in complete shock, and relief quickly spread throughout the group. One night they were hit by gas, and everyone wondered if what they had just seen was ice magic. Others barely believed it. They doubted whether the spell was really cast by Lord Zeke himself. The men slowly began to rejoice as excitement rippled among them. A few guessed that this spell had just wiped out most of the monsters. The troops rapidly regained confidence again while celebrating what seemed like their victory, but the relief did not last long. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble wildly. Knights looked around in panic, wondering if it was an earthquake. And at that very moment, a huge creature emerged before them. Seeing this terrifying monster appear before their eyes, Zeke quietly muttered that he had arrived just in time. According to the standard game system, any breeding ground was guaranteed to appear to accommodate the boss monster. The giant beast let out a deafening roar that shook the entire battlefield. Zeke had already anticipated this outcome. The lair where a large colony of magical beasts lived simply had to have a powerful leader inside. And as he thought, finally, a huge boss monster appeared. Very quickly, the knights panicked. Their confidence melted under the pressure of an overwhelming enemy. Some shouted that they could never defeat such a creature. If the monster used the same coordinated attack again as before, it would be the end for all of them. Zek quickly recalled the essence of the technique, called Unison Link, a special ability where several users synchronized and together amplified their mana to unleash an attack much stronger than usual. And he could not even imagine that simple beasts were capable of such skill. At that moment, the glowing sphere forming in the monster's maw grew and flared even brighter. The knight screamed in despair, sensing the attack was about to be released from the safety catch. In the next moment, a gigantic air projectile burst forward like a massive beam of destruction. It breaks ice walls with ease. Everyone could only freeze and watch in shock at the incredible power of the attack. Luke was horrified. He admitted, if everything continued the same way, their only way out was to run, and yet he remained completely unmoved. Zeke coldly ordered them to stop squealing like worthless pigs. He questioned whether they had already forgotten who he was. He was Zech Legius, the demonic child of Legius. Still, Luke had to hesitate. The breeding ground full of Badger Bruzzes, led by a boss capable of activating Unison Link, was much farther than they had anticipated. Somewhere inside, Zeke even admitted the situation could not be underestimated, yet he still had methods he could use. Without any fear, Zeke stepped forward and directly into the face of the huge monster. Calmly, he declared that he had already seen enough of its pathetic performance. And now his turn. Without wasting a second, he cast Ice Shot. The spell instantly struck the monsters rushing at him. The knight froze in amazement, and shocked Zeke was capable of such sorcery. Watching as the small, greedy, stinking otter examples, weasels were so easily killed. The giant beast let out a furious roar. The tree trembled. She realized the monster was completely enraged. Clenching the sword hilt tighter, Zeke declared this was a battle for survival, so he would show no mercy. At that very moment, he unleashed a colossal ice spear at the enemy. The knights froze with mouths agape in shock, unable to believe the colossal ice spear. Some shouted that the monster could not possibly dodge such a strike, while others laughed with hope, thinking victory was finally near. But Blink immediately realized something was wrong. He screamed that it wouldn't work. The beasts froze again and activated Unison Link. In a moment, the massive creature unleashed a frontline Delta Storm summoned by the wind, but even before the destructive attack could reach its target, Zeke effortlessly neutralized it. Luke and the Gaston tree froze as the spell vanished. Then the tree suddenly notices something strange. The Managolava has not disappeared. At that very moment, Zeke coldly ordered the whole world to freeze. Icicle Ray, an icy gust, exploded across the battlefield, instantly covering everything with frost. The trees and ground around Zeke froze solid. And before the beasts could escape, their bodies were completely encased in thick layers of ice. Silence fell over the battlefield. Every monster froze in place, as if petrified. In the next moment, Zeke swung his blade, and the frozen beasts shattered into countless shards of ice. As soon as Luke recognized the technique, his jaw dropped. It was a saturating bombardment strike. Since Unison Link required extreme precision and synchronization, there were always delays before it could be activated again. Zeke predicted this weakness perfectly. He deliberately lured the monsters into responding to his middle and upper spells, and as soon as they engaged in Unison Link, he unleashed a wide area destruction spell to erase them completely. Lup could only stare in disbelief at the incredible level of strategy and magical intuition Zeke possessed, as well as the colossal talent needed to execute such a plan flawlessly. So it was a demonic descendant of Layazi. When the battle quieted, Zeki turned to the others and without ceremony announced that the show was over, then ordered everyone to leave. Not far away, hidden behind a tree, a man who had witnessed the entire battle trembled with horror. His gaze fixed on Zeke, eyes full of fear, he whispered that the boy was a demon. Later, when he returned to the village head and other residents deeply bowed to Zeke, sincerely thanking him for saving them. The peasants repeatedly thanked him for saving their home, but even in this gratitude, rumors quietly spread among the crowd. Some of the peasants nervously called Zeke the ice demon. Their voices trembled with fear. Following those murmurs, Zeke simply exhaled quietly. Even after he saved their village, they still looked at him with fear and suspicion. That's exactly how one should react to a thief, but he had long been used to it. Without wasting time on answers, Zeke simply announced that they were leaving. The tree quickly rushed to him and begged forgiveness for the peasants after everything he had done for them. But as soon as Zeke spoke, he immediately interrupted her. The peasant's mumbling was not worth paying attention to. No matter what others said, he remained who he was. Without warning, Zeke pulled the hood off the tree's face and told her not to look down. Instead, she should look forward and keep moving. After those words, he stormed off, leaving the tree standing in stunned silence. Meanwhile, Blink overheard several peasants whispering among themselves about why the cursed child spoke to the ice demon. Approaching them with a smile, Blink warned, "Be careful around this girl, she is Lord Zeke's favorite. If they dared to do something foolish, the ice demon could come back for them personally." At these words, the peasants immediately flinched in fear. Closing her eyes, the tree quietly repeated Zeke's words in her head to look forward. Slowly reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a small knife. Without hesitation, she cut the hair that had hidden her face for years. At that moment, the tree silently swore to herself, one day she would become just like him. On the way back, when Zeke was sitting in the carriage, he noticed that Luke was staring intently at him. Then, with an unusually joyful expression, Luke suddenly patted him on the back and praised him, calling him a promising future lord. The praise suddenly threw Zeke off balance, and Luke only smiled shyly. But in a moment, Zeke realized the man was pretending. Soon Zeke's face darkened with anxiety. He silently replayed in his mind how much precious time he had wasted on an event that wasn't even in the original game storyline. He was tormented by how much this would affect the main plot later. At the same time, he reminded himself, if the events repeated the game too precisely, he would still eventually die. His fencing and magic were already beginning to grow, but under the current circumstances, death was still practically guaranteed. Whether this event existed in the game no longer mattered. Now he really needed live combat experience. Zeke hardened his resolve. Whatever it took, he would continue gaining experience and become much stronger than before. But one thought stubbornly smoldered in his head. He could not guess what the protagonist Van was doing right now. While Zeke's carriage rolled further down the road, another wagon passed them going the other way. From inside the wagon, a man shouted that they were almost in the village and ordered the boy next to him to put away that ridiculous saber. The boy immediately objected. Is that man speaking seriously? For him, this sword was almost his own soul. Eventually, he proudly declared that he was a fencer. And the future hero, this determined young boy, is none other than Van, the protagonist of Wish's Soul. A few days after the incident, Zeke devoted himself completely and utterly to relentless training. In his former life, he was an ordinary high school senior who dreamed of the game Wish Soul. But before he could realize this, he was reincarnated as the main villain of the game Zeke Legius. Since the character was destined to die at the hands of the heroes, Zeke decided to thwart that fate and rise to the very top. But his magical power grew so rapidly and relentlessly that ordinary swords could no longer resist it. One day his father suddenly called him. Exciting news! A dungeon was found within their territory. The dungeon, as is known, teemed with ancient weapons and rare magical artifacts such that could never be found on the surface, so they were priceless treasures. Hearing this, Zeke froze in shock. Inside he realized, it was nothing else but the Dungeon of Legis straight from that game, a labyrinth explored at the end of the story, where the legendary sword of the ice god rested. Excitement flared on his face as he remembered. The divine blade must withstand his devastating magic. For him, it was the perfect opportunity to become significantly stronger. Lord Lagia explained, unfortunately, the protocol required the kingdom's research team to first inspect the dungeon. Zek quietly groaned to himself. He was annoyed, thinking it was just typical government bureaucracy. Then his father told him that the team had already arrived and introduced them. 3 persons stepped forward. The first was the mage, Marx, the second Nightmare, and finally appeared the sage, Blance. The sage introduced himself as Glance Folt, leader of the survey team, and politely expressed pleasure at the acquaintance. Lord Lagia enthusiastically explained that Glance was held in great respect, and they even say that he advises the mages of the guild. Glance confirmed that both Marx and Mia were experienced pros, a skilled mage and a capable knight, and assured them the team would be invaluable to them. As soon as Zik heard the name Glance Fault, it struck him like lightning. In the game, Glance was one of the future members of the heroic squad, a man of impeccable honesty, known as the Sage. He also led the first team of explorers sent into the Lagia dungeon. Except for the view of himself, the entire survey squad was destroyed. It was the shameful annihilation of Team Survey in Lagia's dungeon, a prologue incident that launched the main story. Zeke recalled how Glance took responsibility for the disaster and disappeared into seclusion. Yet despite this, House Lagias continuously blamed him for the expedition's failure, which caused bitter resentment to build up between Glance and the family. Later, that hostility would flare up between House Lagias and the heroes. In other words, this adventure was yet another of those that happened because of Zeke. Deadly fake flags. Realizing this, Zeke immediately turned to his father and himself asked permission to join the survey expedition. He glanced, and everyone, including the others, stared at him in surprise. Zeke only smiled boldly while confidently waiting for his father's decision. Glance barely managed to suppress a small chuckle and said that the zeal of the young lord deserves respect. Yet he explained, the expedition already lacks guards, and exploring the dungeon is too dangerous for inexperienced novices. Zeke replied immediately, saying he expected as much. A look would give something like that away. After all, if no one watches, everything turns into a real bloodbath for treasure, doesn't it? 3 members of the survey team noticeably flinched at the accusation. Zeke continued coldly, if they say otherwise, let them prove it. He asked what the real problem was, and confidently added that he definitely did not need an escort. It was proudly proclaimed that Lord Lajaya, supposedly, his son finally awakened, and accepted the responsibility to become the next lord. Zit calmly replied that this was true, and the main thing during the expedition, he still intended to get himself the appropriate sword. Without any hesitation, Lord Lajaya gave his consent, and informed the research team that Zeke would accompany them. Inside, Zeke focused on two goals he had to accomplish to smash these deadly flags. First, he needed to obtain the sword of the ice god. Next, to ensure that the reconnaissance squad survived the dungeon expedition alive. Soon the group reached the Anceli Forest dungeon in the territory of the Lajaya domain. Without wasting time, they moved inside. While he walked behind the others, Zeke coldly warned them, no movement without his clear consent. If they made a mistake, their lives would be at stake. Mark quietly complained to Glance, grumbling that the arrogant little lordling was simply an unbearable bore, and Glance only replied, "This is their lord's order," so there was no choice, they had to endure him. Mia glanced back at Zeke and saw that he was staring intently in response. When the group advanced further, they eventually hit a dead end. Zeke snorted and called them pathetic. Despite his remark, Mia summoned Verbaposwist and ordered her to search the surrounding area. While Zeke watched her, he casually said that it was just a basic tracking spell, and nothing impressive. Mia looked around the area and aloud pondered what kind of structure could be here. Mark suggested that it was some kind of ancient altar, and Glant expressed the opinion that perhaps the dungeon itself was not that deep. At that moment, Mia noticed that Sick was heading towards the wall. Seeing that he was about to touch it, she solemnly and sharply warned him not to do it because he was an amateur. Explaining that there could have been traps of any kind there. She did not finish speaking. Zeke touched the wall. The entire cell flashed with bright light, and something material suddenly appeared on the altar. Mia and Marks froze in shock. They immediately recognized it as Ward's own. The convict turned to them with an indifferent expression and explained that by the method of masonry and wall construction he had already understood. This catacomb was built in the late prehistoric civilization. Because of this, the standard detection magic against mechanisms of that time does not work. Those devices often responded to certain magical frequencies. For him, it was an elementary truth. Then he mockingly called the group amateurs and coldly advised these worthless pieces of baggage to stay behind him where they belonged. Without a shadow of hesitation, Zeke stepped right onto the altar. Mia immediately tried to stop him, but he paid no attention to her at all. She gritted her teeth in anger and complained that he stumbled upon the warp zone purely by luck, and now he acts like some kind of expert. Meanwhile, Glyne silently pondered where Zikleas had acquired this knowledge. The young lord's understanding of ancient dungeons was far deeper than that of an ordinary person, and Glyne could not help but wonder who Zik really was. As they ventured deeper into the dungeon, Zeke effortlessly solved one mechanical trial after another, casting precise, eye-shot spells that hit targets requiring perfect timing. Take for yourself what usually requires 3 people working together. In an instant, he solved the stone puzzle that required flawless order of arrangement without even stopping to think. Deadly traps designed to crush invaders from above were simply recklessly bypassed under his command. Stomping behind, Mark muttered under his breath in disbelief and could not understand what exactly was happening. Mia agreed. Zeke navigated the dungeon as if he were already the master here. She even suggested that maybe he had been here before, but the very thought sounded impossible. Glyne shook his head and did not agree. He ordered them to watch Zeke more closely. Despite confident movements, Zeke barely stood on his feet. It was clear he was using enormous reserves of endurance to keep this. Pasethas is not how someone well acquainted with the dungeon behaves. But what troubled Glance even more was Zeke's attitude. Zeke suddenly glanced back and cursed them as ignoramuses, mockingly asking if they enjoyed their slow walk and casual conversation as if they were going on a picnic. Inside, Zeke began putting everything together. Zeke always stayed ahead, constantly on alert, never lowering his vigilance. At the same time, he deliberately pushed everyone away with sharp words and arrogant behavior. Suddenly it dawned on him, could it really be like that? That Zeke deliberately distanced himself from them and at the same time protected them. While the group continued to descend deeper into the dungeon, Zeke stealthily assessed the rest. He couldn't help but think, they are incredibly skillful. Mia the Knight did not lose focus for a moment and was constantly ready for battle. Marks continuously maintained her detection magic, showing no sign of exhaustion, while Glance himself had an incredibly stable magical flow and unshakable calm. Honestly, Zek-E realized, a team of this level most likely would have reached this place without his help. The game never explained how such capable people disappeared into nothingness. Now that he thought about it, Zek-E could not imagine how experts of this caliber could have been so easily destroyed. Then Mark suddenly commented on how strange the dungeon felt. Despite how far they had gone, they still hadn't encountered a single magical creature. Zeke silently agreed. Even if he had disarmed the traps in advance, the complete absence of monsters was unusual. In the game, this dungeon was filled with dangerous enemies. A tormenting sensation crawled under his skin. Could it be that he, unknowingly, led them straight into a death trap? As soon as they entered the next chamber, Zeke froze. His gaze fixed on the object lying right before them, the sword of the ice god. Excitement flashed on his face for a moment, then his expression darkened. Something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, Marks lunged forward and shouted that she felt a colossal magical power from the treasury. Zeke reacted instantly, without any hesitation. He cast ice magic to block her path and warned her not to touch it. Mia turned to him angrily, but Glance quickly raised his hand to stop her. Cowering, Glance quietly said that he finally understood. Lord Zeke was trying to protect them. Confused, Mia asked what he meant. Before anyone could answer, a fierce lightning bolt suddenly burst from the sword of the ice god. The entire chamber trembled wildly as the doors behind them slammed shut with a dull crash. Zeke clicked his tongue and whispered a curse under his breath. At that moment, the altar exploded with blinding light. Everyone froze in stunned silence as something material slowly began to manifest inside. And then, in the next moment, a gigantic creature appeared. Everyone shuddered and gasped in shock when the archdemon appeared. Gaines immediately recognized the creature. It was a legendary ancient magical breed, one he believed in only as a myth. The realization struck him, and Mia instantly ordered everyone to be cautious. Ignoring her order, Zeke launched an attack with ice shards directly at the monster. Like thick smoke, it spread throughout the chamber. He decided that waiting cautiously was pointless. For him, the first strike was reconnaissance, a necessary way to measure the enemy's strength. The ghost of the demon in the arch effortlessly extinguished the attack and did not receive the slightest scratch. Leaving traces of shock, Zeke quickly realized the creature had some kind of anti-magic shield. He remembered archdemons were rare even in the game, appearing only during special events. They were monsters with a bad reputation, whose attack patterns constantly changed. And he was finally convinced that this was the very creature that destroyed the original group of scouts. Suddenly, the curved demon struck the ground with a powerful punch. The secret chamber cracked, a devastating shockwave burst outward. In the next moment, the monster lunged straight at Mark. No one had time to react and struck her in the midair, harshly throwing her against the stone wall. Mia rushed to check on her, and she curled up in pain. Zek froze in shock for a moment. He couldn't believe that Marks was defeated with a single blow. Mia immediately stepped forward. Since magic cannot harm this creature, only physical strength will be used in the fight. Despite Glance's attempts to stop her, she unleashed her unparalleled sword dance attack against the archdemon. Her blade struck the creature's barrier. But the monster barely moved. As if casually, it counterattacked and slammed her into the ground with a crash. Zek froze in shock when he realized the demon can block physical strikes as well. His gaze immediately shifted to Mark. She struggled to get up once more. With pure stubbornness, she raised her hand and summoned Ignis, King of Flames. A blazing spirit appeared before them, and the entire room ignited with scorching heat. Zeke stood still, amazed by such an advanced spirit magic, then quickly realized maybe another elemental attribute can bypass the demon's defense. But as soon as the archdemon heard this, it immediately responded. A third barrier appeared and completely destroyed the King of Spirits' flame. A shocking wave swept through the group. Even that colossal power proved useless. Then Glance stepped forward, gripping the staff's handle tighter and tighter. His hand suddenly tensed, his shoulder bulged with strength as he raised the weapon and unleashed the sage's signature, attack, a technique infused with all elemental attributes. Staff fired forward with incredible force and exploded on impact, covering the area with clouds of smoke and flames. For a moment, hope flashed on Mia's face. She decided the attack had succeeded, but as soon as Zeke realized the truth, hope vanished instantly. The archdemon appeared completely unharmed. It was then that he finally understood the ability of that creature. The monster had 4 separate shields, capable of nullifying any attack, physical or magical, or spiritual. To overcome this, those barriers first had to be broken. The archdemon immediately opened his mouth, and a furious surge of power accumulated inside it. Zeke immediately sensed the threat and warned everyone about the attack. Without wasting time, the team activated all their defensive techniques, raised barriers, set up shields, and created ice walls, preparing for a massive strike. The bow-legged demon sprang from the bow and delivered another devastating blow. Everyone fought with all their might to withstand his onslaught. Despite all their efforts, the devastating blow pushed them back. Zeke hit the ground, stunned by the destructive power of the attack. He didn't even have time to recover. The archdemon began preparing another strike. Realizing that there was no way to avoid it, Zeke froze in shock. At that decisive moment, Mark, Glance, and Mia stepped forward without hesitation and stood right in front of him. Together, they raised their barriers and withstood the full force of the demon's attack, fiercely resisting the crushing pressure as their bodies trembled with tension. Zeke was left speechless by their actions, even when he was seriously wounded, and Mia stubbornly held her ground and refused to abandon her duty as a knight. Then he looked at, and it turned out that he had a grandson about Zeke's age. Before giving him the small gem, he explained that this is an ancient relic transfer orb, an object capable of teleporting a person to a safe place within a certain radius. Unfortunately, there is only enough energy for one. Zeke Skazki was shocked when he was offered to escape alone, but her heavy breathing from wounds reminded Mark, someone must survive and return with information about Archdemon. Otherwise, the entire mission and the sacrifice of each would be in vain. Zeke fell into silence and looked at the condition of his comrades. Mia and Marks were both severely wounded and exhausted, and he himself was already on the edge. He knew he had already found a way to defeat the monster, but the trouble was that all of them had less and less strength. For a moment he doubted, was there really only one thing left to abandon them and save himself? Sensing hesitation, Glens assured him, they still have one last trump card. At that moment, all three activated Unison Link together. High-level technique that synchronized and amplified their magical power. Zeke immediately recognized the ability and was surprised that even they could use it at all. At that moment he realized there was still a chance to win. Zeke stood up and declared that if they really wanted to turn the situation around, they would need his power. Mia looked at him and was confused. As soon as Zeke activated his own Unison Link and forcibly interfered with their synchronization, the sudden interference struck Mia's body with sharp, cruel pain. Mark stared at him in complete disbelief and could not understand how Zeke forcibly connected to their perfectly balanced synchronization. Meanwhile, Glance could only freeze in shock, recalling the years of ruthless training required to master Unison Link, while Zeke invaded their connection effortlessly. Despite their reaction, Zeke just smirked confidently. For him, the technique mastered by people he considered inferior never went beyond his capabilities. When their powers finally synchronized, he prepared to turn the battle against the Archdemon. Zeke recalled, every Archdemon is a master of combat, but these four almost impenetrable shields around him withstood even the most powerful ultimate techniques and did not break. However, the very fact that none of their attacks worked became the clue needed to overcome the defense. Realizing this, Zeke shouted for everyone to launch a counterattack. Glance warned, even when their magical power is accelerated by Unison Link, it is still impossible to know the true limits of their combined might. He reminded Zeke, if the situation becomes hopeless, use the teleportation orb and run. Zeke brushed off the repeated warning with confidence. Faith that a path for escape will not be needed. In his thoughts, he was sure the powers given by Unison Link would be enough to win. At that moment, the fiery Emperor Phoenix was summoned. The huge phoenix immediately rushed at the Archdemon, covering everything around with flames. Under the exhausting heat, the shield that held the demons slowly began to melt. Zeke froze in shock as the barrier, seemingly invincible, finally bent and gave way. The first shield fell exactly as he had predicted. In his thoughts, Zeke understood the real trick behind the shield. It could not be broken unless struck by two or more attackers at the same moment. The Unison connection did not just multiply their magical power. She gathered the strength of all four into one devastating strike. Mia instantly indicated that 3 shields remained, and without hesitation took the turn. She immediately rushed straight at Archdemon, but the demon instantly raised his hand and was already preparing a new attack. Zeke quickly noticed the incoming strike and tried to warn her, only to see how Mia moves with stunning speed. He couldn't comprehend such swiftness, so he wondered, could this double be another effect granted by Unison Link? With incredible acceleration, Mia closed the distance. The second shield field shattered instantly. Marks's grip exploded, realization bit in. They had successfully destroyed another barrier, and only 2 shields remained. Zeke quickly understood. As soon as the shield shattered, they finally managed to inflict real damage on the Archdemon, even if the wound was only minor. Even so, the discovery ignited the fighting spirit in everyone. Mia then turned to Glance, and he responded with a fierce roaring attack. The power struck the body as he activated muscle magic, encompassing all attributes. With both hands raised high, he surged into the sky, then sharply dove straight at the Archdemon. Gathering all his strength into one blow, he unleashed Sacred Sage Evil Subjugation directly on the enemy. The shield instantly shattered into pieces from the strike. glance landed back on the ground, and the archdemon slowly touched the spot where he had hit. Watching everything unfold, Zeke forced a smile. He realized only one shield remained. She looked at him, then called out, and relied on the last strike with her hands. Zeke confidently brushed off the worry, believing there was nothing to be concerned about. Deep inside, he felt an incredible surge of magical power rolling through his body in waves after merging with the other three. He gathered that incredible energy in his sword. He unleashed an icy strike with sparks at full power. As soon as his blade struck the last shield, it shattered into countless fragments. Mia and the others burst with joy as soon as the last barrier finally fell. At last, the true flesh of the archdemons was fully revealed. Zeke immediately prepared to finish the fight, but as soon as he moved, his sword suddenly crumbled in his hands. Frustration washed over him like a wave as he cursed the terrible moment. At that very instant, the archdemon gathered a dazzling, enormous light in his hand and released it straight at him. Mark struggled extremely hard to try to activate protective magic, but Mia instantly realized they would never make it in time. The attack hit Zeke right in the head, and a gigantic explosive wave erupted, engulfing the entire area. The frozen smoke stretched over the battlefield, and when it finally cleared, Zeke had completely disappeared. Shock pierced the group. They feared he had been struck directly, but Glance quickly understood something was wrong. The four-way unison link that held them was still intact, so Zeke was alive. In a moment, Zeke's voice suddenly sounded behind the archdemon. The demon sharply turned in surprise and immediately saw that he was standing there completely unharmed. Mia froze in complete shock and silence. She could not comprehend how he had appeared behind the enemy in an instant. Her gaze immediately recalled the relic he had given to Zeke and understood. He had used a teleportation orb to escape the attack. Without hesitation, Zeke grabbed the sword of the ice god and snatched it from the place where it rested. At that very moment, he rushed forward and with a whirlwind struck Cocytus against the archdemon. Under the blow, a furious wave of power exploded. Bright light covered the battlefield. The overwhelming attack instantly destroyed the archdemon. After the battle, all four successfully escaped from the dungeon. Mia remained impressed. Zeke really managed to defeat the legendary archdemon. From the very moment she playfully clung to him out of excitement, Zeke immediately reacted irritably, trying to push her away, and Mark quietly smiled at their usual exchange. Soon Glance sincerely spoke to Zeke and advised him to learn to rely on others. He said that when someone walks the darkest paths, comrades nearby can light the way forward. With allies' support, Zeke could become even stronger. Hearing these words, Zeke pondered his original version from the game, realizing that the former Zeke would never have created a unison bond with anyone. Glance's advice lingered in his thoughts for a long time. At that moment, a strange voice suddenly echoed in his head, addressing him as a descendant of Lagia, bound by an oath. Seeing the sudden change in Zeke's facial expression, Glane immediately understood something went wrong. Zeke was silent. All his thoughts were fixated on the mysterious voice ringing directly in his head. Again, the same power called him. The voice confidently promised, "It grants him power." At that moment, awareness awakened in Z. Slowly, he shifted his gaze to the ice god's sword and finally understood where that address came from. Several years passed after that event deep in the forest. Luke informed Zeke where exactly the creature had gone. Now Zeke, who was 15, indifferently brushed off the warning and declared that he did not need Luke to point it out. He quickly found the creature, cornered it, and mockingly aimed at the beast for getting into a dead end. But the magical creature suddenly lunged at him. The convict only sneered boldly while the creature trembled. Sharforn passed through his body without any resistance seen, yet he remained completely unharmed. Confusion spread across the creature's face while Zeke tugged at it, mocking and asking where she was even looking. At that very moment, the body before the monster dissolved into ice and shattered into pieces. Realizing he had been deceived, the creature panicked and rushed to find Zeke's real location. Zeke only sneered contemptuously at this, mocking the so-called legendary beast for believing in a simple icy illusion. In the next moment he appeared, and with one precise strike cut off the stag's antler. Having won, he still released the beast into the forest. Luke raised the fallen horn and approached him with a smirk, noting that Zeke actually has a good heart beneath his tough demeanor. Luke Hartman, who had also just turned 15, indicated exactly how Zeke cut the horn, noting that the unicorn was not even wounded. Zeke responded confusedly. He insisted that the signal was the only target, and the monster's flesh was just standing in the way. Luke only grimaced in a smile, stating that this proves his point. The fact that Lord Zeke allowed such a rare magical creature to live freely showed that he has compassion, despite his terrible attitude. Zeke dismissed the comment, stating that Luca had clearly lost his mind. Luke Blink's son was the same boy whom Zeke once saved from magical sclerosis. Over the past 3 years, he had become too attached to him. Although Zeke saw a problem in Luke, his attention was fixed on something much more terrifying. When he froze, staring at his reflection, he saw a figure of a skull clinging to his body. He was reminded again, the death flags around him were still active. Ever since a few years ago, when he obtained the demon's sword in the dungeon, everything began to change. When the sword spoke to him for the first time, Zeke was completely stunned. The weapon declared itself bound by an oath and introduced itself as the demonic sword Lagius, addressing him as the last descendant of the bloodline of Lagius. Returning from the dungeon, Zeke could not tear himself away from thoughts about the words of the sword. He was gnawed by the question, did such a blade even exist in the game, and what did this covenant really mean? Then the sword showed he is forcibly drawn into the role of Zeke Laius. These words threw him off track. The sword somehow knew his real name. And whatever he did and tried, his words and actions were always twisted into the same cruel behavior that was characteristic of the primitive Zeke Laius. The realization hit him painfully, especially because he could not say it out loud. The sword warned, if everything goes the same way, he will eventually die. Zeke was caught in shocked denial. He clearly remembered. According to the game's plot, Zeke Laius was doomed to die. It was this fate that was the reason why he worked so stubbornly to change everything. He trained tirelessly, learned fencing from a knight, and even avoided conflict with just a glance. In his mind, he insisted that he had handled everything perfectly. And the cold sword replied that such a consequence is inevitable given Zeke's current stat, especially while his memories remain unfinished. Zeke, confused, repeated the sword's words, not understanding what it meant by missing memories. They explained that some memories were sealed because they disturbed him while he was carrying the role of Zeke Laius on himself. These words immediately made Zeke freeze. He felt suspicion. The sword hints at his assigned role in the game, a fate where he will ultimately be defeated by the protagonist. If this were true, then the lost memories could only mean something closely connected with that fate. When he tried to put everything together, the sword suddenly declared that it would grant him power. Naming him the last descendant of the bloodline Lagia, it commanded him to challenge fate under the eyes from the underworld that had witnessed death. The next moment, unbearable pain struck through Zeke's eyes. At that moment, Mia casually glanced at him over her shoulder and said that he had not appeared for quite a long time. Mark jokingly guessed if they were delayed because of a bathroom break, and Glyne grimaced at the knight for speaking so crudely. While their quarrel continued, Zeke once again plunged into thoughts and tried to understand what kind of sword it really was. Although it fell silent again, he could not help but wonder if this was really an object that existed in the game. And even more, he was gnawed by the question, what do the so-called underground eyes that perceive death mean? But as soon as he looked at the others, shock suddenly overwhelmed him. He saw how figures stuck to their bodies like skeletons. Zeke was caught in complete disbelief, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Gradually it dawned on him, if these eyes truly see death, then the figures clinging to them must be the Reapers themselves. But then why does only he see them? Without hesitation, Zeke shouted sharply for everyone to stop immediately, and warned them not to take another step. Mia, Glance, and Marks immediately stopped and, filled with confusion, turned back to him. At that very moment, a giant landslide crashed onto the path they had just been about to take. Three froze in shock, wondering if everything had collapsed because of the damage they had previously caused to the dungeon. Mia praised Zeke's sharp attentiveness. Glant admitted that he saved them all. Marks added that Zeke's instincts are truly incredible. For now, Zeke noticed. The figures resembling grim reapers that surrounded them had disappeared. He realized they had just managed to escape death, and that eerie presence had dissolved. Turning back to the present, Zeki remembered everything that had happened since he gained eyes capable of seeing death flags. Since he obtained this power, the demonic sword of the Laias had remained completely silent. Although he still did not know which exact pieces of memories were sealed, he came to the conclusion, there is only one thing he can do. Avoid every death flag that appeared to him. Zeke knew, in such situations, hidden missions are usually carried out unnoticed, and then suddenly lost memories open up. This happened in games, so he convinced himself that in the end everything would work out as it should. His thoughts were interrupted when Lucas asked if he had once again fallen into deep thought. When Zeke looked at him, suddenly a guess flashed in his head. Sam Lucas can also be an important character connected with this story. This opportunity only strengthens Zeke's determination to regain his lost memories as soon as possible. After some time, they arrived at the Adventurers Guild. The receptionists froze, staring at the object in shock, not believing that the horn in front of them was really from a unicorn. He said that most people can't even hope to see it for a moment. Zeke calmly replied that he never agreed to requests he couldn't fulfill. His cold response made the old man shudder. Luke quickly intervened and told Zeke not to sound so frightening. Smiling with his whole face, he explained to the administrator that Zeke was often misunderstood because of his sharp tongue, but in reality, he was more honest than anyone he knew. However, the old man did not seem convinced. He simply noted that Zeke treats everyone equally in his own way. Zeke was a little surprised that Luke actually managed to make the old receptionist say something like that. Before he could respond further, a guild employee approached them and explained. A new client specifically requested the two of them by name. Luke looked confused and asked if the request was really addressed to them. The employee confirmed this, explaining that the client asked for a duo whose recent achievements had already become a topic of conversation in the guild. After that, he informed them, the client is waiting upstairs in one of the back rooms. Without hesitation, Zeke and Luke went upstairs together. On the way, Luke noted that this was the first time in their lives they had received a direct request by name. Meanwhile, Zeke was replaying the past 3 years of his life in his mind. Since becoming an adventurer, he had mostly focused on taming quests to earn money independently and at the same time gain real combat experience. For some reason, during those jobs, Lucas began to follow him around, and later the two of them started being perceived as a duo. After that, Lucas noted that such situations happen extremely rarely. Jokingly, he added, as soon as the clients find out they are dealing with someone from the famous horror house Ledges, the request will probably be cancelled immediately. Zeke replied coldly. He asked if Luke wants to spend the rest of his life bedridden again. Luke immediately stepped back and said he was just joking. Despite the sharp response, Zeke secretly admitted to himself he was thinking the same thing. Most likely, the client hired them only because of their reputation and achievements. But still, he could not help but wonder what kind of man would dare to search for them deliberately. As soon as they entered the room, the woman in the cloak bowed and greeted them, thanking them for coming. When she took off the hood, Zeke froze in shock. He immediately recognized Seal Estella in her. A skeleton-like creature clung to her from behind. As soon as he looked at the spot, he immediately understood this was another death flag. The room plunged into heavy silence until the seal was the first to break it. Remaining calm, she introduced herself, Seal Estella. Luke's eyes widened sharply shock as soon as he heard her name. The Duke Estella's house itself had incredible prestige, but it was ruined by the fact that she had silver hair. The convict immediately realized what it meant. In the kingdom of Diablo, silver hair was considered proof of royal blood, not just strands, but completely silver hair were considered among the most gifted members of the royal family. Without any hesitation, Luke fell to one knee and paid homage. Noticing that Zeke remained standing calmly, he quickly whispered to him to kneel as well, warning, even a commoner understands what silver hair signifies. Zeke simply exhaled irritably through his teeth. He didn't care whether she had silver hair or not. Since she was the one who called them, he saw no reason to pretend to be modest. Then he arrogantly sprawled on the sofa and directly stated that if she intended to ask someone for a favor, she should first sort out her attitude. Luke silently stared at him, unable to believe his eyes, and shuddered with horror. How could Zeke say something so reckless to a royal person? Such disrespect could easily result in punishment up to execution. To Luke's surprise, she only quietly smiled in response. She said that the rumors about Zeke seemed to be true after all. Abandoning all formalities, she immediately got down to business. Sayal revealed an unknown plague is spreading in the regional city. Although they thought it was magical sclerosis, the symptoms did not resemble anything previously recorded, and they did not know what to think. When Zeke heard the name of the disease, he was immediately jolted. It was the same disease that once struck Luca. Sayal explained that she needed Zeke and Luca to help identify the ailment and treat the infected. According to the information she gathered, the two of them had exceptional knowledge about the condition. Inside, Zeke admitted he knew much more than anyone else could realize. After all, he developed the medicine and even knew the exact formula. He forced the Adventurers Guild to keep both the medicine and the identities of its creators secret. Realizing this, he acknowledged the seal was much more capable and knowledgeable than the enslaved princess he had counted on. Luke prepared to accept the request, but before he could answer anything, Zeke immediately refused. Luke turned to him in complete disbelief. Zeke coldly snapped, "It has nothing to do with him and let the kingdom deal with it itself." But inside, he was already cursing the situation. There was no chance he would go voluntarily with someone who literally drags death banners behind him to a city devoured by a deadly plague. Despite the refusal, Seal remained completely calm. She admitted that his answer was predictable and informed, rejecting the request would lead to both him and Luke losing their adventurer licenses. The threat momentarily threw Zeke off track. He sarcastically remarked that her manners were too refined if intimidation was needed for them. Seal just sweetly smiled and stated that she was simply studying at the lazy Esteli itself. At that moment, Zeke could barely reconcile the woman before him with the holy heroine he remembered from the game. Instead of an honest princess, she used her power to investigate people and pressure them into obedience, understanding that making her an enemy would only bring even bigger problems. Zeke gritted his teeth and reluctantly agreed to the job. Seal laughed confidently, saying she did not expect any other answer from him. Shortly after that, the group set out for the afflicted city. The chariot rolled them further forward. Seal expressed her gratitude one last time for such a respectful acceptance of the request. Zeke snorted mockingly at Sile's words, asking what she meant by noble consent when she had actually forced them to submit through threats. Luco quickly intervened and insisted, Zeke is actually a good person deep down in his soul, and most likely he would have eventually accepted the request anyway. But inside, Zeke resolutely rejected this thought. He was sure, no chance he would agree voluntarily. Sil carefully looked at Luke and asked if it was really so. Luke enthusiastically told that Zeke once saved his life, and from this Sil's smile became even deeper. She noticed that there seemed to be an exceptionally strong bond between the two of them. Embarrassed, Luke scratched the back of his head. Unexpected praise made Sil stop in surprise. Blinken asked if Luca really respected her that much. Luca promptly confirmed and explained that the one who dedicates themselves to saving people is the ideal of nobility. Sil's expression softened a little as soon as she revealed the truth about her origin. Although she had royal blood, she was considered illegitimate. Since she was born with completely silvery hair, no one could deny her lineage. Therefore, the ducal house of Estella took her under their care. Although she was by no means welcomed in the family, Luke hesitated and awkwardly admitted he had never known such details about her. Meanwhile, Zizek vaguely remembered he had heard something similar somewhere before. Sile calmly continued confessed that she once dreamed of becoming worthy of her silvery robes, the very mark of royal power. She wanted to become noble, someone everyone could be proud of and admire. And to achieve this goal, she was ready to do everything necessary. Luke stared at her mesmerized, admiringly calling her ideals worthy and openly comparing her to his advantage with Zeke. Hearing this, Zeke sharply glared at him, while Seal just laughed loudly at the quarrel. Soon the carriage finally pulled up to Apiana, a regional city located in the western part of the Atrin territory of the Diabel Kingdom. As soon as Zeke looked at it, shock spread across his face. It seemed to him that the whole place radiated danger as if flags of death were flashing in every glance. Suddenly nearby, a panic scream rang out. A woman, unable to contain her despair, begged for help and explained that her husband had fainted. Seal immediately reacted. He was frightened by the situation and made sure that another victim of magical sclerosis had appeared. She begged Zeke for urgent help. Without any hesitation, Zeke examined the unconscious man, having assessed his condition. Luke lifted the man onto his back and declared that he would carry him to the hospital himself. While the others walked away, Zeke quietly stayed behind. Later in the quarantine building for epidemic patients, Luca was shocked by the incredible number of infected. Exhausted caregivers rushed through the corridors with nowhere to go, breaking into a panic run, barely managing to keep up with the crisis. When Seal saw that Zeke had left no trace anywhere, she aloud wondered where he had disappeared to. One of the knights walking nearby asked if he had completely abandoned them, but Luke immediately denied these accusations, insisting that even someone like Zeke would never have done such a thing. Before he could finish the defense, Zeke suddenly appeared. He calmly said that things in the city were worse than expected. Luca immediately demanded, where had he been? But Zeke completely ignored him. Instead, he went straight to Seal and quietly said that he needed to talk to her alone. Impressed by his restrained tone, Seal asked if he had found something really important. Then Zeke revealed the object carefully wrapped in fabric. He explained that something in the outbreak seemed unnatural for a common disease, so he inspected the city himself. According to him, he found an object buried under the city center. As soon as the Seal saw it, its eyes widened in shock. It was a cursed object. After she examined it, Zeke came to a grim conclusion. The strange phenomenon spreading throughout the city was not magical sclerosis. It was a curse. He immediately confronted Seal with a question: had she missed the appearance of the curse? Seal admitted she felt nothing unusual. Her answer made Zeke plunge into deep thought. In the original game story, Seal was known as a first-class master of divine art. She had super powerful healing abilities and the power to cleanse even the strongest curses. But the Seal standing before him now could not detect even the slightest trace of cursed energy. Zeke quickly understood the reason. This version of the Seal was not yet destined to awaken its powers. Now, despite her royal blood and reputation, she had not a shred of true divine might. Realizing this, Zeke understood. The way out of the crisis would have to be sought without relying on divine art. Soon they told the people the truth. The revelation immediately threw the crowd into chaos. Shocked voices erupted throughout the establishment, and people retold these words again and again with disbelief. The disease destroying the city was not a real ailment, but the result of a cursed artifact. Panic and rage spread lightning fast among the inhabitants. Some guessed who dared such cruelty and why. Others burst into curses out of helplessness, eventually understanding why healing magic did not work at all on the victims. One of the residents begged the Seal in despair if there was any way to stop the curse. But when she admitted that they still had not found a solution, the crowd exploded with fury. Many were already on the verge of despair and exhaustion, and her uncertain answer only fueled their panic. The atmosphere threatened to spiral out of control. And as soon as their eyes fell on Zeke, many instinctively stepped back. Without warning, Zeke punched the wall with all his might so hard that a visible crack remained, and the room instantly fell silent. He coldly mocked them foolish peasants and pointed out that just a moment ago they had only learned the truth. Instead of shouting in vain, he ordered them to finally think for themselves. The crowd immediately fell silent under the pressure of his presence, and then from among the people, someone tentatively suggested, if the cause is really a curse, then isn't Lady Seal capable of dealing with it? An elderly man spoke nearby, recalled an old legend about the silver-haired maiden. Those standing around quickly recognized him as the director of the quarantine facility. The elder explained that this tale is known throughout the kingdom. Once, when disaster struck the city, the daughter of the Estella family gave herself to the gods and saved countless lives. For now, both Luke and Zeke immediately understood where the conversation was heading. Anxiety dripped inside them, and then the base director directly pointed at Seal. For now, both Luke and Zeke immediately understood where the conversation was heading. Anxiety dripped inside them, and then the base director directly pointed at Seal, and stated that among them, there already stands a girl with silvery hair. At that very moment, a sharp pain pierced Zeke's head. Fragments of memory suddenly flickered in his head and the lost returned. He recalled that in Seal's backstory from the game, her divine powers awakened only after she was chosen as a sacrifice. If this is true, then perhaps events will continue to unfold the same way naturally, in their own course, even without his intervention. But his thoughts were cut off mid-word. Zeke's gaze slid to the terrifying skeleton-like figure clinging to Seal, and he immediately understood. She had become even bigger than before. A chill ran down his spine. If the sacrifice Seal was really meant to awaken her powers and save the city, then only one terrible question remained. Why was her death flag becoming even stronger? Hearing the revelation, the townspeople desperately begged Seal to save them by sacrificing herself for everyone. Seeing the scene, Luke immediately called out to Zeke, urging him to help seal it. The crowd quickly fell silent as soon as Zeke finally spoke. It was far too obvious that this was the perfect moment for her. He remembered her cherished wish to become noble, the one everyone admires and is proud of. According to him, she needed to very carefully consider what exactly she could truly do to fulfill that dream. Hearing his words, the people around quickly picked up on them. They nodded together in agreement. Having said everything, Zeke turned and began to walk away. Luke tried to stop him, but before he could, one of the knights stepped forward and told Seal that Zeke was right and that she needed to make a decision. Luke quickly interrupted her, insisting that Zeke did not intend for her to become a victim. The knight only looked at him clear and with open contempt. At that moment, the director of the establishment informed Seal that she had until noon the next day to decide, reminding her that only she has the power to save the city. When everyone finally dispersed, Luke approached her and assured, all those words from Zeke sounded cruel. He was sure Zeke did not mean for her to lose her life. While he was speaking, Seal remembered Zeke's last words, and quietly felt that she actually agreed with Luke's interpretation. Late that night, determination filled Seal's heart, and she decided to find out what she was capable of on her own. She recalled another plan she had devised earlier and ultimately decided to try talking to the director once more. But before she could act, muffled voices barely audible sounded nearby. She wondered if the visitors had not yet left, so she cautiously approached and peeked through a small crack, quietly listening to the conversation behind it. Inside, the director of the establishment asked if the victim was progressing without setbacks. One of the knights replied that Lady Seal declared she would call a mage of divine magic to heal the patients while she searched for the source of the curse. The director froze in shock and complete disbelief. She could not understand how she could have made such a statement after everything that had happened that day. While Seal listened, she recognized the voice and face of the speaker. It was indeed the director of the establishment himself. The knight calmly ordered him not to panic, explained that he would depart for the ducal house in the morning as an envoy. Then he suggested, supposedly, divine mages are sought during the day with fire, and they are busy with other urgent matters, so sending someone would be impossible for at least 6 months. The director readily picked up, said that such rumors would cause panic among the people, and they would definitely protest, saying they would not survive if they had to wait so long. A smug smile spread across the face of the knight as he mocked the village for relying on the ducal house. According to him, the nobility would never help her because they themselves conspired the curse from the very beginning to get rid of Seal by sacrificing her. Disdainfully, he added, "A simple girl from a commoner family, with silver hair from birth, is foolish if she thinks she will ever be truly recognized by the nobility." Hearing the terrible truth and the cruel mockery directed at her subsided, the Seal quietly turned and walked away. Sincerely impressed, she silently went into the darkness. Tears ran down the face of the ruling Seal as she questioned what she had been doing all this time. Nearby in the hideout, the knights glanced toward the place where she had just secretly listened. Barely noticeable smiles slowly spread across their faces when they realized she had overheard everything. Luke frantically searched the area, not intending to allow Lady Seal to be sacrificed. He reasoned if all the cursed objects that caused the disaster were found and destroyed, then the curse itself could be stopped. Somewhere inside, he was sure, Zeke was also looking for them. But despite all efforts, Luke could not find a single cursed artifact. Disappointment quickly began to eat him from within. While he was snooping, a stranger carefully watched him from the darkness, then suddenly launched an attack. Luke barely managed to block the blow in time, and as soon as everything calmed down, the man immediately accused him of wandering around and destroying his cursed artifact. At first, Luke was confused. He repeated these words, not believing. And then it quickly dawned on him. Zeke had indeed been searching for the cursed artifacts all this time. Since then, Luke concluded, this very man was behind the curse destroying the city. Without any hesitation, Luke declared the criminal will not escape. In response, the man coldly ordered him to shut up and die. Strange tentacles suddenly twisted around the man's dagger and sharply lunged forward, and the rope tightly wrapped around Luca's body. Luca's eyes suddenly widened in shock. He realized he could no longer control himself. But in a moment, he noticed something even more terrible. The problem was not that the body refused to move, but that it moved on its own against his will. The man calmly explained, the technique is the magic of zombification. He added that although Luca looked like a skilled fencer, he was clearly weak in magic. With cold indifference, the man ordered Lucas to kill himself, fiercely struggling against control. Luke resisted with all his might, until his own hands slowly raised the sword right to his throat. Another moment and the blade was about to pierce through him, but Zeke suddenly appeared. In a moment, giant icy spikes burst from the ground. With an explosion, they knocked the sword out of Luca's grip, and at the same time tore the dark tentacles when they crashed into the frozen spikes. Luke froze in shock for a moment. He could not comprehend what had just happened. Meanwhile, Zeke mockingly sneered at him for fighting such minor opponents, and yet having no shame in calling himself his partner. Relief flooded Luca as soon as he saw that he was alive and unharmed. He instantly realized, finally, his body was under control again. Zeke indifferently explained that he had cut off the flow of magical energy that sustained the spell. Hearing this, the man froze in complete shock. It was hard for him to grasp that someone had just severed the very flow of magic, and Luca complained, saying that if Zeke was going to hunt cursed artifacts, he should have invited him from the very beginning. Zeke waved him off, calling him a fool, and explained that the curse was just another type of magic. And since Luca could not even sense the flow of magical energy, he would only have been a hindrance. Despite the offense, Luke only gave a crooked smile and declared that their counterattack was about to begin. The man disdainfully snorted at the two of them, insisting that a third person would change nothing against his dark magic. At that very moment, the tentacle writhers twitched forward again. They lunged at them with terrible force. The man boldly declared that he would make the two of them kill each other. As soon as the brainwashing magic worked again, Zeke and Luke slowly raised their weapons against each other under the spell's influence. With confidence, the man ordered them, without hesitation, to kill each other. But in the next moment, huge icy spikes burst out from under the man's feet. They broke through the ground with a crash and forced him to jump away at the last second to avoid impaling himself on them. Zeke coldly remarked that the man's technique was crude, mocking the very idea that such careless sorcery could even be called brainwashing. The man froze before him in complete shock. Zeke calmly explained that true zombification magic requires delicate and precise control. He said that this weak spell might be enough only to subdue a simple fool like Luke, but it was completely powerless against him. Not giving up, the man immediately struck again and shouted that physical dark magic was much more effective. He cast a spell known as Dark Gravel, Pebbles of Darkness. Instantly, hundreds of dark projectiles flew into the air one after another, sharply, directly at Zeke and Luke. Luke calmly held his position and effortlessly dodged every hostile projectile. In a moment, he closed the distance, and with one saber strike cut the man, making him scream in pain. Watching the exchange of blows, Zeke casually remarked that he forgot to mention one important detail. In a fistfight, Luke was evenly matched. Zeke raised his sword at the wounded man and demanded answers. He interrogated why the curse had spread throughout the city and whether there was someone else controlling everything from the shadows. But before he could finish speaking, something terrible happened. A bloodily grotesque hand fiercely burst out of the man's mouth. Both Zeke and Luke froze in shock. They instantly recognized what was happening. It was a summoning ritual. The cursed daemon appeared before them first. Zeke immediately called out to Luke, warning. Together they could never defeat such a creature. Deep inside, he realized this was the worst enemy they could possibly face. Initially, this event was supposed to trigger the awakening of the seals. The cursed demon was a monster that could only be defeated through divine magic. Meanwhile, Syl quietly and wordlessly continued to cry. Somewhere deep in her heart, she bitterly realized how foolish it was to believe that an ordinary girl born with silver hair could truly be accepted by others. Rumors about the sacrifice of a silver-haired maiden to lift the curse resurfaced in her thoughts, and she laughed at herself at the very idea. She was certain no one would feel gratitude for such a sacrifice. They would simply feel relief, finally getting rid of her. At that moment, a distant, thunderous explosion echoed far away. Frightened, the seal immediately turned toward the sound end inside the city. Soft flames and destruction flared up. Anxiety spread across her face as she wondered what was happening. Meanwhile, in the very heart of chaos, icy spikes lunged toward the demon, but the creature stopped them effortlessly. Watching this, Zeke realized with frustration, not only could they not harm it, only holy arts could be used against the monster. At best, they could only bind it for a while. The noise quickly drew the attention of the local civilians. They gathered together in confusion and fear, trying to understand what was happening. Luke urgently ordered them to stay away. Having reported that this area was too dangerous, he immediately triggered a panic. It quickly spread among the crowd, and the civilians rushed to flee. Against this backdrop of commotion, Zeke noticed a seal running straight toward them. He was surprised. He understood. She had heard the commotion and rushed toward the sound. Luke was equally taken aback by her sudden appearance. Syl demanded to know what was going on. Luke explained that he and Zeke had managed to track down the sorcerer who cast the curse and corner him. Before he could continue, Syl sharply interrupted, shocked, because she realized they were talking about the culprit of the curse. Luke confirmed her fears and revealed that the sorcerer had used a type of summoning spell to call forth the cursed demon. At that moment, the demons sensed their location. Luke urgently ordered Syl to run and warned, nothing can harm the creature except holy arts. When Zeke stepped forward, he silently weighed the situation. He knew Syl currently lacked the strength to confront the demon. Such a scale of crisis could be the push that awakens her dormant talent for holy arts, and most importantly, she was their only chance to defeat the monster. Acting quickly, Zeke created a huge ice wall. Blocked the incoming attack and protected everyone from harm. Then he angrily ordered the civilians to get out, calling them worthless burdens, ones that only get in the way. Luke and Syl immediately helped the wounded civilians break free from the chaos, urging them, "Get up and run while you still can." Eventually, they reached the nearest building and hid inside. Breathing heavily after what they had experienced, Syl expressed gratitude to Zeke. They believed they survived because of his actions. But suddenly, a man interrupted the conversation and said that maybe it was the opposite. Everything was true, leaving Syl confused by their words. The man explained, the demon curse appeared only after Zika came, which caused another civilian to accuse him of being a walking curse himself. Hearing these remarks, Syl could not understand why people said such things. Just then Zeke arrived at the shelter and said that this was exactly where everyone had been hiding. The men who had just complained immediately fell silent as soon as they saw him. Sighing with relief, the seals summoned him back. Zeke reported he managed to hold the demon for some time, but warned that it would not last long. Then he returned to the village and asked if she felt any changes within herself. "Are you confused, or what are you asking? What did he mean?" Nearby, several men were quietly whispering, complaining that Zeke was a mage. He should stop wasting time and just kill that monster already. Hearing these selfish words, Zil looked at them in complete astonishment. Meanwhile, Zeke quietly began to get nervous. Inside, he suddenly realized something was wrong. The sacred power of Sile was supposed to have already awakened, but nothing happened. He stubbornly felt some final trigger was still missing. Despair swirled within him when he realized the entire city stands under the looming banner of death. Suddenly, Zeke noticed something unusual. He focused and looked closely. He saw a crack on the chest of the cursed demon. Before he could think anything over, outside there was a sudden roar so loud that the windows trembled. Zeke immediately glanced at the source and saw the cursed demon had already shattered the icy barrier that restrained it. Gritting his teeth in irritation, he impatiently clicked his tongue, seeing his magic destroyed. At that moment, one of the civilians finally panicked and shouted that he could no longer endure the situation. He demanded that Zeke and the others hurry up and defeat the monster. After all, they were supposed to be strong anyway. Sil was outraged by this remark. She reminded the people, Zeke and the others risk their own lives to protect everyone, yet all they do is complain. Zeke almost cast a cold glance at the civilians and dismissed their words as worthless noise. His calm, detached reaction surprised Sil. After that, he declared that the duty of a nobleman is not to indulge the masses. Instead of comforting them, he would rather force everyone to get in line. To him, people were no more than pigs. Their thoughts were worthless. Those harsh words stunned the Sale. Nearby, an elderly man frantically began demanding that everyone know exactly what Zeke had just said. At that moment, Sil finally understood. She recalled how desperately she wanted to save people, but deep down only one thing truly mattered to her: how others viewed her. If her actions did not bring praise or gratitude, one part of her felt, then there was no point in saving anyone at all. And the ideal noble image she so revered was never meant to act for recognition. With renewed determination, Sale called low. Sizzle firmly stated that she had already made a final decision. She will stay behind and meet the cursed demon personally. Even if she cannot defeat him, she was sure at least she will buy time for others to escape safely. She explained that her silvery hair stands out clearly even in the dark, so she is the perfect bait. If she distracts the monster, while Sir Zeke keeps it in place, the evacuation will proceed much more safely. Hearing her determination, the civilians were struck by her courage and self-sacrifice. Meanwhile, Zeke fell silent. And suddenly, a voice thundered again in his head. As soon as he heard it, he immediately recognized the voice of the Sword of Lagias. The voice of the Sword of Lagias spoke to Zeke, and those words made his eyes widen from instant understanding. Without warning, he sharply pulled the seal towards himself. The seal, confused, demanded an explanation of what he was doing, but Zeke calmly stated, "This is the last key." In an instant, he snatched the sword and sharply thrust it right into her chest. Luke froze in shock and even shuddered, but still immediately rushed to the seal. But suddenly, a blinding light burst forth from her chest. At that very moment, radiant wings appeared behind her back. Seal slowly floated into the air, shining with divine light, and everyone below froze, staring at her in complete shock. Zeke explained that the true power of the seal had been sealed by someone. However, using the magical sword Lagias, he was able to destroy the seal without harming it. Such a trick, however, required extremely precise control over magic. Hearing this, Sil remembered how once Zeke had cut through a stream of magic. Suspended high above the city, she spread her wing embrace like a bird. A holy rain poured from the heavens. The city bathed in silver light. People stared upward in stunned disbelief, wondering if the rain falling on them was truly silver rain. In a moment, someone sharply shouted in shock, just realizing their illness had vanished without a trace. Another shouted that they felt even healthier than ever before they first fell ill. Meanwhile, the cursed demon took the holy rain directly on target. His body slowly burned away as he let out wild, painful roars. Luke watched in amazement as the demon slowly began to disappear. At that same moment, the death flag over the city finally crumbled at dawn. Seeing this, Zeke quietly understood. The crack on the demon's chests had been a clue from the very beginning. After that, he ordered Luca to watch carefully, announcing that this is exactly how the legend of the Silver Saint was born. In chapter 13 of the same next morning, Seal slowly opened her eyes and saw that she was lying in bed. Someone nearby immediately noticed that she had woken up, and another sighed with relief. Finally, she was safe. Still confused, Seal asked where she was and what had happened. Then the memories of the previous night suddenly returned to her, and she jerked upright in panic, hurriedly asking about the city and what had happened to the demon. The people around her joyfully explained. It was she who defeated the demon. They said that she summoned a silver rain that completely washed away the curse from the entire city. Hearing this, Seal froze. She could not believe that she had really managed to do such a thing. One man added that every patient who had fallen into a coma had already woken up, and another gratefully said that everyone owed their lives to her. Overwhelmed, Seal admitted that she barely remembered anything. Suddenly, one of the men squeezed her hand and proclaimed her the Silver Saint, declaring that she had become the legendary savior of Apian. Confused by all this, Seal stubbornly insists there was no chance that she could have done all this by herself. At that moment, she remembered Zeke and immediately asked where he was. But as soon as she tried to get up, dizziness overwhelmed her. Someone quickly caught her and quietly warned her not to overexert herself. When Seal looked behind, she realized it was Luke. Luke explained that her condition was completely natural after using such incredible divine magic. Seal shouted at him, and she admitted that she remembered so little that everything still seemed unreal to her. Luke reassured her. He would explain everything that happened that night. Although there were still a few matters that were not fully resolved, he said that Zeke was now handling them. Meanwhile, elsewhere, outside the city, at night a rider was wildly galloping on horseback. While he was riding, he was cursing in despair, not believing that the seal had actually awakened her powers. They told him she was a failure, but she not only drove out the demon, she also completely cleansed the cursed power itself. Suddenly, the knight felt a terrifying chill run through his body and realized, this is not the end yet. In the next moment, huge icy spikes exploded from the ground right in front of him, forcing his horse to stop abruptly. A sharp heel struck through the knight harshly to the ground. In a moment, Zeke calmly stepped into the frame and noted that the knight seemed to be in a great hurry. Checks if he ran somewhere. Only the knight saw Zeke. A cold sweat immediately appeared on his face. Frightened, he demanded an explanation of why Zeke was here. In despair, the knight tried to brush it off as if it were funny, asked if Zeke really believed such absurd fabrications about the seals. He sharply denied it, saying everything about that ducal house, which supposedly cast a curse, was just a joke. Zeke slowly approached closer and calmly concluded that the ducal house had been pulling the strings all along. With a weak smile, Zeke explained that he just noticed someone fleeing the city in panic and decided to take a look out of curiosity. As soon as they heard this, the knight immediately fell silent. He realized that he had exposed himself. Later, already in APN City Plaza, the knight froze in ice with a solid shell like a frozen statue, a cold and eerie warning for everyone who saw it. When Seal reached the square, she froze in shock and stared at the icy figure before Hirsch did not understand what exactly she was seeing. Zeke calmly replied that this was exactly what it looked like, the inspirer of the curse, but he immediately corrected himself and explained, this man was only the one who carried out the plan. Hearing this, Seal exhaled in surprise and froze in disbelief. After all, it turned out that the knight was connected to the curse. Zeke then pointed to the tattoo visible on the neck at night and asked if she recognized this symbol. At first, Seal immediately denied any knowledge of it and asked if the mark had any meaning. In response, Zeke bluntly stated that it was worthless and only then continued. He revealed the sorcerer who summoned the cursed demon had exactly the same tattoo on his body. After this was confirmed on the sorcerer's corpse, there was no doubt left. Zeke continued, saying that even if Seal herself remained ignorant of its meaning, he was sure her stepbrother knew something about it. Now, he had the perfect gift to bring it to the ducal family. The frozen knight stood before them like a preserved specimen. Luke paled and reacted with anxiety, asking if Zeke really intended to break directly into the ducal house. Zeke immediately dismissed this idea, saying that one night was not enough, it was too weak to be proper evidence. Meanwhile, Luke quietly muttered to himself that Zeke looked exactly like someone truly capable of such a reckless stunt. A moment later, Zeke turned to Sayal and ordered her to deliver a message to her brother. If her brother really had business with him, he must come and meet him in person. Zeke further clarified, the request sent through the Adventurers Association was just a pretext. They were supposed to examine him and find out if he was valuable or dangerous to the kingdom. He admitted that at first he tried to avoid attention, behaving as if he were an ordinary traveler, but he realized this step only made him more suspicious. Hearing this, Syl began recounting Zeke's achievements one after another. She mentioned his discovery of a cure for magical sclerosis, his destruction of packs of beasts in the northern steppes, and his exploration of the Lagia dungeon. Seidel emphasized that achieving such a scale makes him unmissable for those in power. No influential figure within the kingdom could ignore someone like him. A barely noticeable smile flickered on Zeke's lips as he said that such efficiency is exactly what he expected from House Estella. Intelligence organization that manipulated the kingdom from the shadows. Nearby, Luca stood frozen in complete stupor, not believing that such a thing could possibly be true. Zeke narrowed his gaze at Syl and addressed her as Agent Seal before asking what her final verdict was. Syl confessed that at first she suspected Zeke of plotting something dangerous. However, after Sheh saw how he risked his life to protect people, he evoked in her the very semblance of that ideal nobleman she had always dreamed of becoming. With complete sincerity, she stated that this is indeed the truth she intended to report. But still Seal admitted her own family Dukel also tested her, so she could not be sure that her report would be recognized at all. Zeke just laughed at this idea and told her not to underestimate her new position. Now she was the Silver Saint, a title so significant that neither the kingdom nor the Estella family could afford to ignore her any longer. Hearing these words, Seal fell silent and emotions flashed in her eyes. Then Zeke showed how differently people treat her now, unlike before. He greeted her and announced that she had finally become a real girl from House Estella. Syl herself immediately rejected this idea, stating that such a status no longer mattered to her. She had already found the path she truly desired. A faint smile flickered on Zeke's face when he told her to do as she wished. Then he turned around and walked away. As she watched him leave, the expression on her face froze firmness, determination. Deep in her heart, she vowed, someday she would walk the same path that Zeke had taken. Later that night, within the Estella ducal house, the young lord struck the ground with his fist in rage. He was furious about the seal, unable to believe that she had broken the seal, placed it on herself with her own hands, and awakened its divine magic. He believed he could get rid of her without dirtying his own hands, but the whole story only proved how secretly talented she was. Even worse was that Zeke Lagias, the man who had helped her, somehow learned about the role of the Estella family as the kingdom's intelligence organization operating from the shadows. The young lord angrily demanded, was Lord Lagias really the worthless and corrupt idiot that rumors whispered about him? He began to suspect that this whole image was just an elaborate disguise, but the butler immediately dismissed this version, calmly stating that it was much more logical to assume that Zeke himself was simply an anomaly beyond expectations. After that, the butler addressed the young lord, Actala Sella, and asked what orders he wished to give next. He also reported that Zeke seemed to have connections with Lord Glance. Hearing this, Actala Stella, the half-brother of the gray-haired man, quietly considered the situation and suggested that perhaps they should try to sway Zeke Lagias to their side. Again in the manners. Zeke observed his parents and immediately noticed that they were unusually cheerful. Lord Lagia burst into loud laughter and proudly declared that it was all thanks to Zeke. Recent achievements of his son greatly elevated the reputation of the House of Lagias. His mother warmly added that she could not be happier with such a result. Although Zeke understood their joy, he could only sigh to himself. In the original game, real Zeke had no chance to restore his reputation. Everything was doomed to depict him as a villain. And over the past 3 years, he trained tirelessly to become stronger. Revan took on the life of a wanderer and helps to save the city of Apian. Even this should eventually turn against him. But this time, everything changed. Thanks to Silver Saint's seal, openly supporting him, it elevated his image, not spoiled it. Yet Zeke still could not ignore the increasingly growing uncertainty about the future. Events increasingly unfolded beyond what he knew from the game. He has already saved 2 of his companions, those who initially belonged to the protagonists. He came across demonic sword steel, which was never in the original story, and awakened the eyes of hell, capable of seeing death in advance. Moreover, a mysterious organization continued to operate within APN, secretly controlling everything from behind the scenes. When the deviations accumulated so much that they could no longer be counted, Zeke realized the future might no longer follow the scenario he once knew. At that very moment, the servant arrived to announce the arrival of guests. According to the servant, emissaries from the Ducal family of the Estella house had come to visit. Zeke shuddered with surprise upon hearing the mention of Ducal house and immediately wondered if these visitors were somehow connected to Seal. Soon he was met by a familiar voice and Zeke immediately recognized the newcomers. The visitors were Mia, a knight from the Glance's survey team, and the magical sign. Wasting no time, Mia explained that they had seen the possibilities of House Lagius with their own eyes and had come with a request specifically for Z. She reported that the Council of Lords would soon take place, a gathering held every few years where nobility from all regions convenes in the royal capital. They wanted Lord Zeke to participate as part of the security forces guarding the event. Zeke was noticeably surprised when he heard the name of the gathering. Mia further explained that House Lagio itself would naturally attend the council, but as soon as the nature of the request became clear, Lord Laggia immediately refused. He firmly stated that he would never allow his precious heir to be placed in such danger. Marx responded calmly, noting that it was truly unfortunate. Protecting the royal capital during such an important event was considered a great honoron that could further elevate the prestige of the name Legend. He added that the request came directly through the recommendation of Sage Glance himself, meaning the entire princely family would surely take notice. It would be a perfect chance for the whole world to see the brilliance of Lord Zeke. Having felt this, Lord Latzia instantly changed his posture and enthusiastically declared that Zeke absolutely must defend the royal capital. The way the father so quickly retracted his decision surprisingly stunned Zeke. Lord Latzia promptly announced that he would start preparing for the upcoming conference immediately and would entrust the rest of the details to others, then quickly left the room. When the father left, Zeke directed his gaze at Mia and Marx and calmly made it clear that, considering how they had accommodated and advised him, most likely this was related to the recent incident in Apian. Mia looked truly impressed by his deduction and noted that his insight remained as sharp as ever. Then she explained that they still had not managed to uncover either the identity or the true purpose of the mysterious organization spreading curses throughout APN. While the enemy's motives remained unknown, there was a high probability that the same organization would strike the future Council of Lords as well. Zeke immediately realized how serious everything was. The king himself was supposed to attend the opening ceremony, and even the slightest mistake could not be forgiven. At that moment, Marx added that, despite that, the recommendation from Lord Glance was absolutely sincere. The request came directly from the ducal house of Estella. Hearing this, Zeke's thoughts spun like a whirlwind. It occurred to him, was Seal involved in all this, or maybe it was a fraudulent scheme played by her half-brother? The danger of a trap did not leave him, lingering in his mind. Yet he understood, refusing the request would almost certainly cause even greater complications. Resigned to the situation, Zeke cursed the stupidity of everyone involved in it to himself. But suddenly another thought occurred to him. The hostile group already knew his face, so sending him to such an important gathering without any precautions was unwise. Mia just smiled, and it became clear that they had been waiting for him to raise this concern. Marco then cheerfully announced that they had already come fully prepared. Zeke looked at them in confusion, unable to understand what they meant by prepared. In response, Mark opened a large briefcase, and inside various makeup tools and disguise equipment gleamed. He proudly declared that they intended to completely disguise Zeke. The sight immediately made Zeke freeze, but Mia calmly reassured him. Everything will be fine, stop resisting and just give the job to her. Meanwhile, far, far away by the lake, on the shore, Van stood alone in silence, focusing all his energy on this. Firmly gripping the sword, he concentrated to the limit. Before opening his eyes, with one sharp movement, he raised the blade above his head, and with all his might struck it down so that it crashed with a crack, and fierce waves scattered across the water surface. This was Van Freak, the main character of Wish Soul. Having finished his attempt, he heard a girl approach him and say that he looked too heated. He turned to her and recognized instantly like a tree. He asked if she had heard about the incident in Apian. The very existence of such an incredible adventurer deeply shook him, and he could no longer sit idle. Then he said that she also diligently trained her magic. The tree confirmed this. It admitted that she never once wanted to return to the old village, so she kept pushing herself forward. Her words made Van recall the moment when they first met. When their trading company stopped in Alhai village, he was shocked. Suddenly a tree approached them and begged to be taken to work together with them. At that time he had no idea that she could have such an extraordinary talent for magic. In response, the tree only quietly chirped, and in her soul she admitted, compared to that person, she was still very far behind. Meanwhile, Van firmly declared that he had no intention of staying at his current level forever. Whatever happened, he was determined to carve his name as a swordsman. Seeing the unwavering determination in Van's eyes, the tree smiled warmly at him. Then she announced that it was time to set off, explaining, The main caravan had already arrived at the royal capital. While the tree walked ahead, Van stayed very close behind, and his thoughts involuntarily drifted to the future Council of Lords. For him, this gathering sounded like a perfect business opportunity, but above all, he could not help but feel excitement about the thrilling adventure that might await there. Full of enthusiasm, Van loudly declared that they were heading to the royal capital, and beside him the tree joyfully applauded. Later in the royal capital Spirito, a horse-drawn carriage rushed through the huge city gates. Seeing the huge, almost entirely fortified city, Luke couldn't help but say that it truly lived up to its reputation, a place that throughout history had repelled invasions of countless monsters. Then he explained, all the guards assigned to the conference were first supposed to gather at the Adventurers Guild headquarters because numerous organizations would participate in the event. The guild became the most convenient meeting point due to its status as neutral territory. Shortly thereafter, the carriage finally stopped. Luke was the first to get out and said that they had arrived at the designated place. Then he reached out to Zeke and warned, stay alert, because they had no idea where an enemy organization might be watching them from. As usual, Luke respectfully addressed him as Lord Zeke, but he quickly snapped out of it and instead spoke of him as, under the alias Lady Brynhilda. When Zeke finally stepped out of the carriage, Luke was overwhelmed by an unreal indifference. He just froze, staring at him. It was hard to imagine that a combination of gender-changing magic and makeup could transform Zeke into such stunning beauty. Zeke immediately brushed off the remark. It was mockingly noted that such a result was quite natural after all. They had from the very beginning received a high-quality base. Luke could only sigh and point out, despite the complete transformation of appearance, Zeke's character had not changed in the slightest. A little later they arrived at the Adventurers Guild headquarters. Luke could not hide his amazement. The scale of the building was impressive, especially compared to guilds outside the capital. As soon as they entered, they were greeted by people who seemed to be waiting specifically for them. Zeke exchanged a brief greeting with Mia and Marks. Although Marks quickly took over the conversation and proudly stated that Zeke's makeup was done exactly as she ordered, she was beaming at how cute he was. But Zeke was clearly irritated. He muttered a couple of curses under his breath and hissed at them to know their place. His reaction only made Mia and Marks laugh to tears. Mia even said that his voice had completely changed. Luke noticed how impressive it was that Zeke remained completely calm, even though he was entrusted with such an important responsibility. Zeke casually brushed off the praise, saying he was just fulfilling someone's request. But inside him, the feeling of anxiety lingered for a long time. After he accepted the mission, he couldn't shake the feeling that these gloomy death flags were almost mocking him. Doubt began to gnaw at him, whether there was really something hidden in the capital itself that posed a real threat to his life. When they reached the meeting room, Mia opened the door and addressed him, Lady Brynhilda, reminding him not to cause any trouble. As soon as they entered, both Zeke and Luke stopped in surprise. Blink was already there. Calmly blinking, Blink announced that everyone had finally gathered, and he introduced himself as Blink Hartman on behalf of the Night Order. He said he was looking forward to working together during the mission. Meanwhile, Zeke recalled, Blink had already returned to active service within the Order. Blink nodded and began explaining the situation to everyone present. Under normal circumstances, responsibility for security during the council would fall solely on the Royal Guard and the combat orders of the Magic Division. But this time, the previous Lords' meetings gathered a bunch of high-ranking nobles and influential figures, so the scale of security needed was completely different, much larger than usual. The city capital itself was gigantic, and the available forces were not enough to fully patrol every district. Because of this, the Church and the Adventurers Guild were asked to cooperate so that each organization could divide the patrol sectors among themselves. To start coordinating the operation, Blink asked each representative to introduce themselves. A man immediately stepped forward and introduced himself, Jorn Glynn from the Magic Division. Marks quietly informed Zeke that Jorn had mastered several complex spells at once and was considered one of the strongest candidates to become the next sage. Then another man introduced himself, Bard Penis from Maria Church, followed by Erin Isisar from the Royal Guard Division. As soon as she stepped forward, the woman introduced herself Harriet Charge, a traveler. Erin reacted with noticeable surprise upon hearing her name. He recognized her as a representative of the A-rank party Wings of Light. He noted that he had recently heard rumors. Supposedly, a cursed child from the Lagios family somehow rose to A-rank, causing many to begin doubting the very adventurer ranking system. Still, considering that such a respected person as Harriet was participating in the mission, he felt relieved and was confident there would be no problems. Hiria casually spoke about the Lagios family herself. Supposedly, although it seemed impossible, rumors claimed they bought their adventure rank with money and connections. She added that even within the church itself, many residents from the Lagia territory regularly came seeking salvation. Aaron also noted that he had heard the Lagia holdings had also declined and fallen into ruin. Quietly listening to the conversation, Zeke suddenly fell into thought. Recently, he had begun to doubt something that had never stood out before. Even in the game, the Lagios family was hated and treated with contempt, like poisonous vipers. And before, he had hardly paid attention to it. But now, hearing how people from other regions spoke about it with such hatred, he felt the situation was alarmingly abnormal. Aaron turned to Zeke and asked if she was also an adventurer. In response, Zeke introduced herself as Brynhilde, a traveler, and pointing to Luke beside her, named him right on the spot. Hearing the name Luke, Aaron mentally repeated it and said it sounded familiar to him. At that moment, Garya whispered the name Brynhilde before stepping closer. She admitted she had never seen her before, and she openly admired Zeke's beauty, but immediately added, if she didn't recognize her, then Brynhilde is somewhere below a rank. And Gary even asked, how did she end up here at all if her face is good but her skills are not? Hearing those remarks, Zeke tried to pull himself together and convinced himself he had no right to escalate the conflict further. He needed to settle everything peacefully. But unfortunately, the words from his mouth came out exactly the opposite. He coldly said that only trash clings to rank. The whole hall froze in disbelief at his answer. Inside, Zeke screamed furiously in despair, realizing again that his thoughts were turning him into Zeke. Then he added that she was called there only because she was strong, and asked if that was a problem. He even mocked further, stating that if they had to rely on a nameless traveler, it only proved their own incompetence. Aaron immediately objected, demanding an explanation of what she had just said. Jeria sharply pulled back, insisting, if Brynhilde is so confident in boasting, let her prove it. Aaron quickly suggested settling everything on the training grounds. Others shouted angrily that they could not allow themselves to be looked down upon because of such a cheeky little one, and declared that she needed to be taught a lesson. When the situation finally got out of control, Luke tried to intervene and stop them, but Blink stopped him, explaining that this was actually a good chance for everyone to see her abilities. Returning to the Knights, he himself had not yet seen how much she had grown. Then Lucas questioned his father, and did not know if that was the real reason why he allowed the fight to continue. Later on the training field, the gathered crowd froze in complete shock. Zeke effortlessly defeated Hiria and her team completely. After that, Zeke snorted mockingly and brazenly asked if that was really all they were capable of. Among the spectators, someone froze in shocked stupor, could not believe that the Wings of Light were defeated so easily. Jorn said that they were supposed to be ranked adventurers, which means they could not be so weak. He concluded, this proves only one thing: the girl was truly incredibly strong. Just then another voice cut into the conversation, noting that such power is quite natural since it came on his recommendation. Jorn twitched in surprise as soon as he realized that Sage Glant himself was speaking. After this news, Aaron admitted the fact that Sage personally recommended him was definitely unexpected. But he still noted that he does not like to bully the weak, although here, it seems, he will not have to hold himself back. When the next battle was approaching, Marks explained to the others that Aaron was the heir of Isilur Marquine. Blink added, everyone who dreams of becoming a knight definitely knows his name. He was famously known as the Lightning Knight. Aaron raised the sword and declared that he was leaving. In the very next moment, he dashed forward with blinding speed and struck Z. Even Zeke barely managed to block in time. Seeing this, Luke flinched in shock as he realized how fast Aaron really was. Without pausing, Aaron unleashed an unrelenting barrage of sword strikes on Zeke, but despite the continuous assault, Zeke skillfully dodged every attack, not missing a single one. Aaron admitted that he was impressed by how easily and quickly she dodged his blows. However, he warned her, his title of Knight of Lightning is by no means for show. The next moment, Aaron lunged the sword towards Zeke, throwing a lightning thrust. Fierce flashes of lightning swirled around the blade, and the attack surged forward with terrible force. Zeke shuddered quietly inside as soon as he saw Aaron using lightning magic. He immediately understood the danger of the spell flying towards him. He reacted instantly. Just as the attack was about to land, Zeke cast an ice spell and Aaron's lightning froze in place, unable to move even an inch. Watching this clash, Glyne froze in surprise. Zeke created an acute-tangled ice block specifically to lure and divert the lightning away from himself. Blink was no less impressed, noticing that Zeke made such a precise decision in just a fraction of a second. Meanwhile, Jorn did not agree with their admiration and confidently stated that Brynhildr had already fallen into Aaron's trap. At that very moment, Aaron again launched a merciless assault. One attack followed another as he unleashed Thunder Arrow, Elect Slash, and Bolt Whip one after another at a furious pace. Despite the relentless avalanche of attacks, Zeke effortlessly dodged every spell and every strike. Jorn noticed that although she was holding up well, Aaron's fighting style was designed to exhaust the opponent's defense with continuous attacks at insane speed. He added, Aaron's magic processing speed is unmatched. And he grinned boldly, stating that it was only a matter of time before Brynhildr would fall. Returning to the battlefield, Zeke defended himself again, casting an ice barrier to stop Aaron's attack. Aaron immediately lunged forward with another strike, but Zeke still held his position. Aaron admitted with surprise that he was able to stop her even this time. Although he confidently asserted that this was definitely her limit, barely had he finished speaking, Aaron unleashed a furious lightning flash that struck Zeke directly. The blow caused her body to collapse to the ground motionless. Seeing this, Aaron said he probably overdid it a bit and called someone to bandage her wounds. But as soon as he turned around, he immediately saw Zeke just a few centimeters away from him. Zeke sneered mockingly and boldly asked if he had confused the statue with her real body. Aaron was caught completely off guard. He could hardly believe that Zeke not only matched the speed of his attack, but also managed to simultaneously impose isolation. Before Aaron could even react, Zeke struck him with his sword and he flew backward, tearing through the air, and with a crash, wildly slammed into the wall. Zeke smiled defiantly and casually remarked that although the medic would not be wasted, so they must ensure Aaron received proper treatment. The spectators waited breathlessly for the result and silently admired him. While Glance burst out laughing at the spectacle, Setcha was frozen in complete shock, not believing her own eyes. Meanwhile, Zeke concluded in his thoughts that these people were not a real threat. Deciding there was nothing more to worry about for now, he also decided to patrol and check the area. As Zeke wandered through the lively town, he noticed that everything was going quite peacefully. In his thoughts, he concluded that the organization would not dare to make any sudden moves right now, so it was possible to relax for a while. Suddenly, a woman's scream pierced the streets, echoing as she begged to stop the thief and shouted that it was indeed a thief. Hearing this, Zeke muttered to himself that public safety was terrible wherever he went. Without hesitation, he caught sight of the fleeing thief and immediately gave chase. Running through the streets, Zeke grumbled to himself that his outfit was completely unsuitable for chasing criminals. And then, in the heat of the chase, his body suddenly crashed into someone. The boy quickly apologized immediately after the impact. At that moment, Zeke's eyes sharply widened in shock. He slowly recognized the person in front of him. It was none other than Van.